Well, good morning, everybody. I've just confirmed that we do have a quorum. So thank you for joining us this morning for this special joint meeting on the day after the first National Day of Truth and Reconciliation. Since yesterday, we honored First Nations, Inuit, and Métis residential school survivors, their families, and communities. It's only fitting that we further acknowledge this morning that the City of Ottawa is located on unceded Algonquin and Anishinaabe territory. This is the second time this year that the Planning Committee and Built Heritage Subcommittee have met together. We have two reports before us today, both setting out details that will guide development of the Ottawa Hospital's new campus near Dow's Lake. We will hear public delegations on the master site plan approval and lifting of the holding provision for the Ottawa Hospital at 930 Carling Avenue and 520 Preston Street and the related heritage considerations.
When Council approved the official plan and zoning amendments in June 2018 for the new hospital campus, it also required that the master site plan and lifting of the holding provisions be brought to Planning Committee and Council for approval. While the master site plan is fully within the jurisdiction of Planning Committee, the City also committed this year to consult with members of the Built Heritage Subcommittee on heritage considerations through an information report.
It's not common for these two committees to meet jointly, but as chairs, we recognized it would be most efficient to hold a joint meeting. It will help streamline public submissions and avoid duplication between our two committees. Starting with a joint meeting will allow us to hear delegations on both reports. Chair Moffat, Chair Gower, and I agreed the most practical approach is to have the joint committee receive public submissions on both matters together, as there is some overlap between the master site plan and its heritage considerations. In a few moments, we'll ask staff to introduce themselves and to provide a presentation explaining both reports in more detail.
As members of the Planning Committee know, we started a practice recently of hearing from a presentation from the applicant, but then holding those questions for the applicant until after delegations. We'll continue that practice this morning. Following the applicant presentation, we will ask members to introduce any motions or directions that they intend to move, including those on the master site plan report. Getting those out there ahead of time will allow members of the committee and the public and delegations to be able to hear those and review those prior to any discussions on those motions. And the public delegations will also have the benefits prior to speaking of actually having those motions. So I remind if you haven't already, I know some of the motions are already out, but if you haven't sent those motions in yet, please do so to the committee coordinator at motions@ottawa.ca. Members of the public, don't send motions to motions@ottawa.ca though. Geez, that'd be so confusing for our committee coordinator. After the motion is introduced, we'll move directly to hearing the delegations. After we've heard from all delegations, we will ask questions of staff on both items.
To give the public members of the Built Heritage Subcommittee the opportunity to ask heritage-related questions, we'll call on them to ask questions to staff first. After that, we'll go to questions from members of council. We'll also ask that Planning Committee members ask all their questions of staff at this stage, including on the master site plan. The goal is to move directly to deliberations once the joint meeting is adjourned and the Planning Committee is called to order. Before the joint meeting ends, we'll hear any wrap-up comments on the Heritage Information Report, and then we will receive that report. The Built Heritage Subcommittee will not need a separate meeting today because there are no Ontario Heritage Act approvals required.
Approval authority for the master site plan resides solely with the Planning Committee and Council. So 15 minutes after the joint meeting adjourns. Now this might be a bit different. So today, because of the number of delegations that we have, we're going to run through all the delegations. We're going to try to get through questions to the applicant. That might be it for today. We're going to look at 1 o'clock and 5 o'clock for breaks. I've committed not to go beyond 8 o'clock tonight. So the 15 minutes after the joint meeting adjourns might actually be Monday morning. So we'll see where we're at over the course of the day. But when the Planning Committee on its own convenes, it will be to deliberate and discuss any of the motions that have been tabled and then make recommendations to Council. Council will consider the recommendations on Wednesday, October 13th.
Yeah, thank you for that. And we also need to deal with a few other logistics. Most, if not all of you, are well acquainted with meeting by Zoom already, so you know to keep your mics muted until you're called upon to speak. Members can use the raise hand button at the bottom of their screens to signal that they want to speak. Any members of council or members of the subcommittee or staff who have joined by telephone can press *9 to raise their hands. You can also press *6 to mute and unmute yourself. As usual, the chairs and committee coordinator will do our best to watch for these cues.
So as mentioned, we do have a significant number of delegations today, 53 at last count, and we have also received many written submissions. The deadline has passed to register to speak, but you can still send in those written submissions to our committee coordinator, Eric Pilo. He will ensure that they're shared with members of council prior to the council meeting on the 13th of October. As we proceed with delegations today, we'll announce the next 3 to 5 speakers on deck, so everyone has a chance to know when they're coming up, and they can be prepared for that. If any registered speakers have difficulty signing into the meeting, please contact our clerk's office. Just call 613-580-2424, extension 22953. So all that. So I'll say it again. So 580-2424, extension 22953. And the meeting is being live streamed and will be archived to YouTube as well. You should be aware that enabling your camera while you speak will mean you appear to all participants and on the YouTube stream. So if you don't want to be on YouTube from here on out for eternity, keep your camera off. When I call on, so either I, myself or Councillor King, will run through the delegations, kind of probably rotate, I imagine. So when we call on you to speak, make sure that you're unmuting your mic and begin. You'll have 5 minutes to provide your presentation. And we will be providing a 1-minute warning to let you know that your time is coming up. Once your 5 minutes are up, I will ask members whether there are any questions. When questions are finished for the delegation, the coordinator will place them back in the Zoom lobby on mute, or they can remain to watch the rest of the meeting if they wish, or they can just watch it on YouTube.
Now, before we go any further, we'll do a quick roll call of all 16 members and remind everyone we need a minimum of 8 members present to maintain quorum. I did receive regrets from member Hassel. Could the committee coordinator please call the roll? A reminder to members to unmute themselves when they are called.
Councillor Dudas.
D.
Councillor Tierney.
Present.
Councillor Lieber.
Good morning.
Councillor McKenney.
Good morning.
Councillor Brackington. Councillor Cloutier.
You can't tear up the
Present.
Councillor Kitts.
Here.
Councillor Menard.
Morning.
Councillor Hubley. Member Halsell. Member Podolsky.
Here.
Member Conforti.
Present.
Vice Chair Quinn.
Present.
Chair King.
Here.
Chair Moffat.
Here.
Chair Gower.
Here.
You have quorum, Chair.
Thank you. Are there any declarations of interest? And I see that member Podolsky has raised his hand.
Yes, I would like to declare interest on this item. I was retained as a consultant by Parsons, one of the consultants to the Ottawa Hospital team, to do a peer review of the Cultural Heritage Impact Statement. And as such, I have to declare interest in this project and very reluctantly will not participate in questioning or comments.
Thank you for that, Member Podolsky. I have also been asked by Member Hassel to note for the minutes that she has declared a deemed indirect pecuniary interest on the 2 items on this joint meeting's agenda. This is because she is an employee of the NCC, which is an approval body on the proposed development through the federal land use and design approval process and holds real estate agreements in relation to the subject property. She anticipates formally reading her declaration at the next regular Built Heritage Subcommittee meeting. And I also see that Councillor Gower has raised his hand.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to thank the public members of Built Heritage Subcommittee for participating today. Members Podolsky, Member Conforti, and Vice Chair Quinn. I think it's worth pointing out that these 3 public members are volunteers and unpaid and have put aside some professional and probably family commitments as well to join us in these proceedings. So thank you to the 3 of you for your participation and contributions over the next day and maybe more than that. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. And we would echo those sentiments, I believe, all my colleagues around the table for the valuable contributions that volunteers make on the subcommittee. Now, I don't want to go into extreme detail about the items on the agenda today. Staff will summarize that for us shortly. But what I will reemphasize for the benefit of the public is what is before us today. Number 1, Built Heritage Subcommittee will be asked to receive an information report that provides an overview of heritage considerations for the master site plan control application for a new campus of the Ottawa Hospital. No specific approval is required as there are no properties with status under the Ontario Heritage Act located on the site. The heritage report outlines measures that will be required in future phases to mitigate potential impact on nearby heritage resources like the experimental farm and the Rideau Canal. The second item before us is for the Planning Committee, which will be deliberating approval for the master site plan of the Ottawa Hospital's new campus at 930 Carling Avenue and 520 Preston Street, the former site of the Sir John Carling building, after it hears from delegations in this joint meeting. For approval to commence, a zoning amendment is needed through a lifting of holding zone application to lift a holding provision on the properties. With so many people ready to offer their input, we need to make sure we are very clear about what is in scope for today's meeting and what is not. We have 2 reports on the agenda, both of which set out details to guide development of the campus. The master site plan outlines multiple phases of work over the next 25 years and aims to ensure we have addressed complex, overarching site considerations at a high level. This means that if the application is approved, this will not be the last chance for the public to weigh in. Each phase will have its own applications, plural, and opportunities, plural, for consultation.
So therefore, we can discuss anything related to either of those 2 reports. But what's not in scope are arguments about site selection. Site selection, as we know, was finalized after years of discussion between Ottawa Hospital, Government of Canada, and multiple reviews and other site options. The city does not have the authority to accept or reject any of the proposed sites, and our authority is limited to matters of municipal interest in site design and layout. So I'm going to ask that you keep that in mind as we deliberate. Now, I know that a number of the delegations will be touching on that. I've seen the submissions. I know they will speak about location. I'm not going to cut them off. I will ask the delegations and come out today and try to focus the majority of your time talking about the master site plan, but I will have a little bit less leeway given to members of council. We know what's before us today. We know the items here. We know the procedure that's in front of us. And we know that we're not here to talk about the location, and we're not here to vote about this based on the location decision, which was made outside of our authority. So now I will call on staff to introduce themselves and provide a brief presentation. We have Sean Moore from our planning group, and we have Leslie Collins from our heritage group. So when you're ready, you don't have 5 minutes. You can take a bit longer. We're okay with that.
Thank you. Good morning. Thank you, Mr. Chairs. My name is Sean Moore. I'm the Senior Planner and File Lead for the Civic Hospital Project. Today's staff are recommending Planning Committee endorse the master site plan to permit the development of the multi-phase hospital at part of 930 Carling Avenue and 520 Preston Street. Staff are also recommending Planning Committee make recommendation to Council to remove the holding provision in the zoning. My colleague Leslie Collins will discuss the heritage aspects of these applications as part of the presentation. And we can is the presentation up? We can go to slide 2 of the presentation. So the site that we're dealing with today is approximately 21 hectares, 50 acres, bound by Carling to the north, Preston Street and Prince of Wales to the south and east, Maple Drive to the west, and generally bound by the National Capital Commission Scenic Driveway to the south. The site is approximately 1 kilometer or less than 1 kilometer from the existing Civic Hospital site. Next slide, please. The site itself is irregularly shaped. If we start in the east and move through the site, I'll just describe some general site aspects. There's an existing 200 space NCC parking lot in the east along Preston and Carling Street. We have the O-Train Trench further to the west. Then we have what is known as the open space of Queen Juliana Park. Then we rise up through the ridge of trees to where the former Sir John Carling building was located. And we can see a surface parking area in the northwest. And to the southwest, we see the old Cedar Hedge Collection and the Dara Tennis Club. I'm going to hand the presentation over to my colleague Leslie Collins for the next couple of slides to walk through some more details about the heritage aspects.
Good morning, Mr. Chairs and members of the committee. As Sean said, my name is Leslie Collins and I'm the Program Manager for Heritage Planning. The report before the committee today as it relates to heritage is simply an information report to provide the committee with the Cultural Heritage Impact Statement and some of the heritage considerations that went into the master site plan application. Next slide, please. The subject site does not contain any resources designated under the designated or listed under the Ontario Heritage Act. As such, no approval under the Ontario Heritage Act is required by Built Heritage Subcommittee or City Council. So it's slightly different than the normal process that is seen at Built Heritage Subcommittee. However, given that the mandate of the Built Heritage Subcommittee includes offering advice to Council on other heritage matters, and given the complexity and heritage significance of this site, staff felt it was appropriate to bring forward a report and the Cultural Heritage Impact Statement for the information of the subcommittee. The recommendation of the staff report is that it be received for information. The subject site is located within the experimental farm, the National Historic Site of Canada, which also includes a variety of federally recognized and classified heritage buildings. The Central Experimental Farm was designated as a National Historic Site as a rare example of a farm within the city, reflecting the significance of agriculture in shaping Canada. It was established by the federal government in 1886 and has made significant scientific contributions to Canadian agriculture. In addition, it's a picturesque cultural landscape reflecting 19th century philosophy of agriculture, features an administrative core, the arboretum, ornamental gardens, display beds, and experimental fields. There are many federally designated heritage buildings in the vicinity of the future hospital site. Photos of all buildings are detailed within pages 45 to 50 of the Cultural Heritage Impact Statement. No buildings are proposed to be directly altered as a result of the proposed development. The site is also adjacent to the Queen Elizabeth Driveway Cultural Heritage Landscape, identified by the National Capital Commission in 2004 for its value as a principal organizing feature of the capital. And then finally, it's adjacent to the Rideau Canal World Heritage Site and National Historic Site of Canada. Next slide, please. This slide is just intended to provide a high-level overview of the heritage resources on and adjacent to the future hospital site. The image does not show every federal building in detail, but the details are included on page 3, figure 2 of the Cultural Heritage Impact Statement. In general, you can see the proximity to Dow's Lake and Queen Elizabeth Driveway, although the site is well outside of the boundary of the Rideau Canal World Heritage Site and its 30-meter buffer zone. You can see in a general, the blue shading is generally the boundary of the experimental farm, as well as the arboretum is not shaded in blue, but that is considered part of the farm as well. The Dominion Observatory Complex is a grouping of classified and recognized federal heritage buildings, and the William Saunders Building is also a federally designated heritage building. I'm now going to pass it back to Sean to go through the master site plan issues. Thank you.
Thank you, Leslie. If we go to the next slide, this slide is going to illustrate that the site is within 600 meters of the LRT Carling station. Next slide, please. I'd like to take a step back to 2017 and 2018 just to see and understand how what process brought us here today. In May of 2017, Planning Committee directed staff to initiate the zoning and official plan amendments for the site. In September of 2017, city staff held zoning and official plan public meetings, which were attended by over 90 attendees. From November to December of 2017, the Ottawa Hospital hosted 7 information sessions across the Ottawa region, including 5 within Ottawa. January of 2018, there was an open house held at Lansdowne, which was attended by over 200 people, including councillors, MPs, and MPPs. And in May of 2018, the item went to Planning Committee, and on June 13th, 2018, the zoning and official plan were passed by Council. Next slide, please. So pre-zoning and official plan amendment, this is what the zoning looked like. So in 2018, prior to that staff report, there were multiple zones on the property, and a hospital was permitted on approximately 13 hectares of the site under the O1 exception and the MC zones in the middle of the property. Next slide, please. And prior to our official plan amendment in 2018, the majority of the site was designated general urban, arterial main street, and mixed use center, with the brown portions you can see on the map being within the agricultural research area. Next slide, please. So staff put together a uniform zone, which was a major institutional zone, and the zone permits the use of the hospital, office, research and development center, residential care facility uses, ancillary uses to a hospital. And the exception zone put on the property was to prohibit several non-related hospital uses that are naturally in that major institutional zone, and to establish a holding provision, which I'll speak to in a moment. Next slide, please. This is the images of the current official plan. The image on the left illustrates that the majority of the site is within the general urban area designation now, with the arterial main street along Carling Avenue and the mixed-use center designation towards the Preston-Carling edge. The slide on the right illustrates Schedule D of the official plan, which represents the transit policy context, with the north-south line being the Trillium LRT line, line 2, and the Carling station in the large red circle, and the east-west red and white line being the dedicated median light rail corridor with the stations identified going along Carling Avenue. Next slide, please. As part of that OPA official plan amendment that staff did, we also, in City Council, passed an amendment to the secondary plan. So this was the Preston-Carling District Secondary Plan, where we brought forward a new hospital area designation, which is purple. So this captured the new hospital district in the secondary plan. Next slide, please. There's also a height schedule within that secondary plan that was amended. So to reflect the concepts, we carried forward the heights in the range of 9 to 15 stories around the Carling LRT station. And then what was amended was permissions up to 20 stories on the top of the ridge, shown in red. And this is acknowledging that this was a large area to develop a main hospital building. Next slide, please. As mentioned earlier, a holding provision was established to ensure that a master site plan, a transportation study, a cultural heritage study, and master servicing study could be approved by Planning Committee and Council. Next slide, please. I'll briefly walk you through the master plan, but I'm going to leave the majority of the details to the applicant. So I'll walk you through the phasing of this multi-phased hospital quickly. Phase 1 and 2, denoted in green in your top right, is the parking garage and trench widening for the O train. Phases 3, 4, and 5 is the new hospital utility plant in purple in the bottom left of your screen. The main hospital building, which has 2 wings, a 7-story north wing and a 12-story proposed south wing with about a 3-story podium connecting. And also the LRT linkage in orange in the top right of your screen. Phase 6 would be research towers and the Carling Urban Plaza in red. Phase 7, A, B, and C are the Carling Towers along Carling and Preston, denoted in yellow. Phase 8 and 9 would be expansions to the hospital to that north 7-story wing. Phase 10 is the bottom of the screen in blue, which would be the future University of Ottawa Heart Institute relocation post 2045. Next slide, please. So we just removed the layers of the phasing. This is the master plan that staff are recommending for council to endorse. Next slide, please. Also want to note that there's a parallel process occurring with the National Capital Commission. This process requires federal land use and design approval granted under the National Capital Act by the NCC. The NCC is to review each subsequent site plan application. The master plan is reviewed against federal legislation and plans, including the NCC's Plan for Canada's Capital and the Capital Urban Lands Plan. The master plan is also was reviewed by the NCC's Advisory Committee on Planning, Design, and Realty, and will be in its future implementing site plan control applications. And the master plan is subject to the NCC's review and resolution, with the NCC's Board of Directors meeting on October 5th. Next slide, please. With respect to community engagement, staff held preliminary community association meeting in May of 2021 over Zoom with various local community associations. An urban design review panel public meeting was held on June 4th, which was attended by over 30 public members. Staff also held a meeting with the former campus engagement group in June of 2021. And then the main public meeting was June 29th, 2021 over the Zoom platform, attended by over 200 public members. In all, also, we received about 200 people have engaged on through Engage Ottawa, our special website dedicated to this project, and by emailing myself as the file lead. We've heard on such matters as impact on local neighborhood streets, LRT connectivity, the need for strong pedestrian and cycling connectivity, tree loss, tree compensation, impacts on the central experimental farm, and the success of the rooftop public space, among other issues. Next slide, please. Staff are recommending approval of the master site plan and the removal of the holding provision on the basis that the master site plan has demonstrated the acceptance of, number 1, the cultural heritage impact statement, 2, the transportation impact assessment, 3, the master servicing plan, and 4, the overall master site plan design. I'd like to welcome Leslie Collins back to speak about the cultural heritage impact statement and the rationale for removing the H with respect to that study.
Thank you, Sean. Next slide, please. So the official plan requires that development applications adjacent to or impacting the Central Experimental Farm, the Rideau Canal, or federally designated properties include the submission of a cultural heritage impact statement. And the purpose of a cultural heritage impact statement is to understand the potential positive and adverse impacts of a proposed development on the associated cultural heritage resources. In this instance, the cultural heritage impact statement considered the potential impacts of the proposed master site plan on the Central Experimental Farm, nearby heritage buildings, the Rideau Canal World Heritage Site, and the Queen Elizabeth Driveway Cultural Heritage Landscape. The Cultural Heritage Impact Statement is intended to identify and assess the impacts, propose mitigation strategies, and make recommendations on a proposal. The CHIS is often an iterative process, being revised after comments from stakeholders and city staff. The first version of this document was submitted to the city in May, with the following revision submitted in July of this year. Comments were received in several areas, but primarily comments from staff, the NCC, the public, and Heritage Ottawa included issues around the potential impacts on the Dominion Observatory Complex, the importance of maintaining the pastoral landscape of the Central Experimental Farm and its rural edge, the potential visual impacts of the complex beyond the former John Carling building, and the commemoration of the West End annex of the Sir John Carling building. Next slide, please. Impacts of a development of this scale are wide and varied in scope. The Cultural Heritage Impact Statement provides a detailed analysis of these impacts in Table 3, which is on pages 70 to 74 of the document. Briefly, the key impacts include the alteration of the historic fabric and the landscape of the Central Experimental Farm beyond the extent of the Sir John Carling building. So while the Sir John Carling building was a large building on the site, the potential impacts of a larger hospital complex were addressed. The Cultural Heritage Impact Statement identified negligible, irreversible impacts of new winter shadows on portions of the Dominion Observatory Complex and the Prince of Wales Drive, Queen Elizabeth Driveway Cultural Heritage Landscape. Given the location of the new hospital at the northeast corner of the central experimental farm, no shadows will change the viability of plantings in the ornamental gardens, the display beds, or the experimental fields. Visual impacts were identified on periphery or background views identified for the central experimental farm, including the William Saunders Building, the Rideau Canal, and the Queen Elizabeth Driveway Cultural Landscape. Impacts on the functional change of a portion of Maple Drive when the ambulance route is established, including increased risk to the South Azimuth Building, which is shown on this slide. As you can see, it's quite close to the right-of-way. So there were concerns about potential impacts from additional salt on the masonry of the building, as well as potential collision impacts. Impacts on views from the Dominion Observatory Dome and lighting and associated light spillover once the hospital expansion is constructed in the future. And then finally, risk of construction, vibration, and dust on nearby heritage buildings. Next slide, please. The detailed mitigation strategies proposed by the CHIS are included again in Table 3 on page 70 of the document. However, the following mitigation measures have been incorporated into the conditions of master site plan approval. Risk mitigation for construction impacts. So this includes issues such as documentation of the historic buildings, monitoring of masonry for cracking, other associated risk mitigation measures that are common in construction projects adjacent to designated heritage buildings. Physical protection of the South Azimuth Building through visually unobtrusive bollards and the monitoring of the condition of the masonry on the building related to salt from the wintertime. And then finally, as the master site plan is not as detailed as the site plan level, many of the draft conditions include a requirement for further addendums to the Cultural Heritage Impact Statement to address the landscape integration and protection of the character of the central experimental farm and mitigation of visual impacts through the individual site plan level as the site develops in its phases. The draft conditions are included as document 1 of the Heritage Staff Report. By including the mitigation measures identified through the Cultural Heritage Impact Statement as conditions of master site plan approval and requiring further study and analysis of the landscape condition, tree conservation and compensation, and integration of each portion as the site is developed, Heritage staff feel the impacts of this development can be reasonably mitigated. I'm going to pass it back over to Sean. Thank you.
Thank you, Leslie. In terms of removing the H from a transportation perspective, the site is truly multimodal in that it does not only benefit from the proximity to the LRT Carling station, the site benefits greatly from cycling infrastructure such as the Trillium Bike Pathway and NCC pathways, as well as walking distance from the traditional main street of Preston Street and being directly on the east-west Carling bus priority corridor. Staff recommend the approval of the Transportation Impact Assessment and its recommendations to support a shift in the modal share away from vehicular trips towards active transportation. Conditions of approval contained in Document 5 will also require such things as a neighborhood traffic calming study, off-site parking strategy to deal with off-site parking impacts in adjacent neighborhoods, transportation monitoring to truth test the findings of the TIA, transportation demand management plan, and LRT connectivity to be direct, weather protected, and clear wayfinding and universally accessible. Next slide, please. In terms of lifting the holding provision for servicing, a master servicing plan has been reviewed by staff. The plan demonstrates the site is serviceable from a water, wastewater, and sanitary perspective, with future implementing site plan control applications to lay out the details of servicing. Next slide, please. I'm going to go through 4 more items, and these are I picked out for rationale for removing the H based on the master site plan being in a position that staff can recommend approval on or endorsement on. First one is LRT connectivity. The master site plan has been designed such that it does not preclude the options of providing a number of things. These include pedestrian overpass over Carling and or providing pedestrian access under Carling from a south side portal and or extending the platform, station platforms underneath Carling Avenue with access from a south side portal. If we look at the slides, on the slide on the left shows the parkade with the white line on top is we're calling the High Line, which is a pedestrian access, which will go directly from the hospital to the Carling station. And the slide on the right if you look at, you'll see Tower A and Tower B, and there's options to provide that south side portal that I was speaking about. The key is that the options can work and the details of the best option can come forward in the implementing site plans. Next slide, please. In terms of tree canopy, as part of the design of the master plan, the applicant has demonstrated commitment to a significant canopy coverage, including the designing of the site to preserve the mature trees within the ridge. There's a total of about 500 or some trees on the site to be retained. The image illustrates that despite anticipated tree loss on the property, the replanting is aiming to achieve a 40% canopy coverage and tree compensation within the central experimental farm. There's conditions of approval as well in document 5 speaking to these matters. Next slide, please. With respect to cycling connectivity, cycling has been accommodated in the master plan in 2 routes around the parkade, to the west through the internal streets on a 2-way cycle facility, and on the second route to the east on a 2-way cycling facility. The cycling facility to the east will run along Preston Street and then turn into Prince of Wales on a 1-way cycle track. Approximately 500 sheltered bicycle parking spaces are to be provided in the structured parking. Next slide, please. With respect to open space and planning committee's direction for staff to find open space on the property, 2 types of open space are being recommended for approval through the master plan. The first is an urban plaza at Carling Avenue across from the intersection of Carling and Champaign Avenue, and that is the top left image. Second is a proposed green roof on the parking garage, which would reestablish a significant open space on the site with approximately 23,000 square meters or 5.5 acres of open space for public use. The programming opportunities for this are vast and could include tennis courts, playgrounds, splash pads, passive outdoor activities, community gardens, and more. Both spaces will be publicly accessible. Next slide, please. Finally, the master plan has undergone a rigorous design review. Urban design review panel sessions were held March 5th and June 4th of 2021. The National Capital Commission Advisory Committee on Planning, Design, and Realty was held May 21st, 2021. Special design meetings were held with the city, the NCC, and the hospital team to explore matters of mobility, interim conditions, and edge conditions with the central experimental farm. The design review culminated in several achievements. If we look at the screen, the parking garage has been designed such that landscape is integrated into the side of the garage in various elevations. If we look at the top right image, this is the Prince of Wales elevation, where you can see berming and layering of vegetation and trees. The bottom right image is the Preston Street elevation, where you can see the same effect, but the grading is more gradual, which permits a pedestrian ramp experience up to the top of the garage through the layers of vegetation and trees. The top of the garage has also been pulled back and undulates to minimize its massing at this important gateway site in adjacency to Dow's Lake. Finally, other achievements through design have been maximizing the space for pedestrian and cycling facilities on Preston and Carling, re-examination of tree retention along the edges of the central experimental farm, minimizing the use of Maple Drive as a vehicular access, thus aiding in the preservation of a pastoral entrance, ensuring the master site design can accommodate enhanced transit connections when funding becomes available, and ensuring the master site design does not preclude future capacity improvements to the Trillium line. That's the end of the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you so much for the presentations. I'd like to thank both Sean Moore and Leslie Collins from Planning and Heritage. Before we begin hearing public delegations, I would ask at this time that members introduce their motions.
So first, I think we have a motion from Councillor Brockington. Has Councillor Brockington joined us yet?
If he hasn't, I'd be happy to introduce it on his behalf, Chair.
Yeah, I mean, it has to be formally introduced to planning committee anyway, so go ahead and read it for
Okay.
now.
Whereas the Central Experimental Farm is an important historic, cultural, and scientific institution in the heart of the city, and whereas the Central Experimental Farm has been an important part of Ottawa's green space system since 1886, whereas the residents of Ottawa would like assurances for the long-term protection of the remainder of the lands and the institution outside of those leased to the Ottawa Hospital and those required for transit improvements on Baseline Road. Whereas the Central Experimental Farm is under the operating jurisdiction of Agriculture Canada and the federal land use planning jurisdiction of the National Capital Commission. Therefore, be it resolved that Planning Committee recommend that Council direct the Mayor on behalf of Council write to the Minister of Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada, the Minister of Environment and Climate Change Canada, the Member of Parliament for Ottawa Centre, and the Chair of the Board of Directors of the National Capital Commission, requesting that the Government of Canada ensure the long-term protection of the remainder of the lands outside of those leased to the Ottawa Hospital and those required for transit improvements on Baseline Road and the institution by pursuing the following steps. 1, introducing federal legislation to ensure long-term protection, and 2, developing a new master plan for the farm, seeking local input and the input of expert scientists.
All right, thank you, Chair Gower. Our next motion will go to Councillor Leeper on a traffic study.
Thank you very much, Chair. So my motion is with respect to traffic. Whereas there is significant potential for localized traffic impacts that increase the volume of cut-through traffic on local residential streets, and whereas an influx of cut-through traffic to formerly quiet streets would constitute an undue adverse impact on the quality of life for those residents, and whereas further study is required to fully understand those impacts that have not been adequately addressed in the traffic impact assessment, and whereas traffic mitigations to discourage cut-through traffic may require an unknown level of funding that would be required to be funded by the city. And whereas a key mitigation will be to encourage eastbound hospital vehicles to exit the 417 at Carling Kirkwood and proceed to the site on Carling Avenue, bypassing residential neighborhoods for a faster trip time, therefore be it resolved that the Planning Committee A, amend Document 5, Conditions of Master Plan Approval Item 14C to read, the owner acknowledges and agrees that a neighborhood traffic study is required prior to registration of the hospital building site plan agreement. The study will include within its terms of reference the expected traffic patterns and impacts to volume, speed, and parking within 1,500 meters of the hospital site and mitigation options. The study shall be to the satisfaction of the General Manager of PIDE. B, amend Document 5, Conditions of Master Plan Approval to add a new requirement 14D to read, the owner acknowledges and agrees that it bears responsibility for funding mitigations identified in the neighborhood traffic study where those are recommended for implementation by the city. And C, recommend that Council direct staff to work with the applicant to make an application to the Ministry of Transportation to relocate the Highway 417 directional signage from the eastbound Parkdale off-ramp.
Thank you. And does Eric, do we have, because I know my schedule here says to go to Councilor Menard next, but Councilor Lieber does have a second motion on the Trillium Path. Do we have that ready to go right now? So we can just get it while he's already up. Oh, there you go. Perfect.
Thank you. And I'll read this one from Eric's version. So with respect, sorry, this one's with respect to tree conservation. Eric, I think there might be one with respect to cycling. Thank you. Whereas the location for the new Ottawa Civic Hospital is serviced by the Trillium bike path, and the portion of this bike path from Carling Avenue to Prince of Wales Drive is planned to be eliminated at the site of the Phase 1 above ground parking garage. And whereas the Trillium bike path will be rerouted around the proposed Phase 1 parking garage along Preston Street to the east and through the internal road network to the west back to Prince of Wales Drive on separate bike facilities. And whereas the main hospital building is shown on the master site plan as set back from Carling Avenue with an internal road network leading through the site from Carling Avenue to Prince of Wales Drive and to the main entrance. Therefore, be it resolved that Planning Committee directs staff to work with the Ottawa Hospital on linking the proposed cycling facility through the internal road network of the site, separated safely from the main road to the main entrance of the hospital building.
All right, thanks. And that motion that did pop up, it was, I believe you're moving that on behalf of Councillor McKenney, correct?
I believe that's
Tree
my motion.
planting
But,
motion?
oh, sorry. Oh, am I doing that on behalf? Oh, yes. Sorry, on behalf of Councilor McKenney. Yes.
Just because they don't sit on planning committee is all.
Yep.
Yeah.
So we'll get that one up and. There we go. Yeah. So this is on behalf of Councillor McKenney. Whereas the tree conservation report supporting the new hospital master site plan identifies 523 trees measuring 10 centimeters diameter breast height or more to be removed. And whereas the conditions of the master site plan approval require a target of 40% canopy coverage over the entire site to be implemented through the individual site plan control applications, with preference for on-tree site planting, but allowances for both on and off-site tree planting. And whereas the early implementation of tree planting on the property to compensate for tree loss in the early phases of development will aid in expediting the overall long-term tree canopy coverage. Therefore, be it resolved that Planning Committee directs staff to work with the Ottawa Hospital to identify tree planting areas that can be planted outside of any impacts of future development phases, thus allowing significant upfront tree planting compensation to occur on the site.
All right, thank you, Councillor Leeper. And then we have 3 motions from Councillor Menard.
Thanks very much, Chair. I'll just wait for it to come up here. So the first one is on the parking within the site, whereas the master site plan for the new Ottawa Civic Hospital illustrates a total of 3,099 parking spaces identified on the plan within various parking zones. And whereas the report highlights 2,400 parking spaces to be located within the proposed phase 1 above ground parking garage and 699 parking spaces forming surface parking spaces around the site in other parking zones. And whereas the planning committee meeting of May 22nd, 2018, committee and council approved Councillor Brockington's motion directing staff to work with the Ottawa Hospital and the community engagement group on the delivery of open space, and in particular open space adjacent to the Central Experimental Farm. And whereas surface parking takes away from areas where existing trees could be preserved and areas where new compensation planting could be proposed, therefore be it resolved that Planning Committee directs staff to work with the Ottawa Hospital on substantially reducing the amount of surface parking around the site during future implementing site plan control applications.
Thanks. And just for clarity, I don't think you're asking to just eliminate parking, but suggesting that they look at alternatives such as underground in certain areas. Is that what you're asking?
It would be both, Chair, to look at underground, which is what the report currently says they could be doing, as well as look at a potential to reduce the amount of parking necessary on the site overall. The next motion is on the integration of
transit, right?
Transit.
Yeah.
Whereas the location for the new Ottawa Civic Hospital is in proximity to transit facilities, including the light rail transit O train line 2 crossing the northeast portion of the site and the Dow's Lake station, but is located 235 meters away, the equivalent of 2 full football fields from the main entrance of the hospital. And whereas Carling Avenue is a priority transit street with frequent bus service servicing this corridor and existing bus stops at Sherwood Drive and Champaign Avenue within 200 meters and 300 meters of the site respectively. And whereas the main hospital building as shown on the master site plan has set back from Carling Avenue with an internal road network leading through the site from Carling Avenue to Prince of Wales Drive and to the main entrance. Therefore, be it resolved that Planning Committee directs staff to ensure that the proposed internal road network is capable of accommodating local transit services from a road design perspective, and also to assess as part of the transit service plan for the hospital whether local transit services should utilize these local roads and enter into the site to complement the other transit facilities surrounding the site.
Thanks. And then you have one final motion regarding community involvement in offsite parking.
Thanks, Chair. And whereas the new campus of the Ottawa Hospital will be in proximity to several residential neighborhoods within wards 14, 15, 16, and 17, and whereas the community associations representing the neighborhoods have concerns about how new traffic patterns and off-site parking may impact their neighborhood streets, and whereas the conditions of master site plan approval in document 5 requires a neighborhood traffic calming study prior to registration of the main hospital building, therefore be it resolved that Planning Committee directs staff to work with the Ottawa Hospital on encouraging them to set up a community transportation advisory group and ask adjacent ward councillors to recommend community representatives to inform the required neighborhood traffic calming study and off-site parking.
All right,
Thank you.
thanks. I assume that's try to avoid the next Ruskin Avenue or Linda Lane.
Yeah, that's right. We know that people, when they go to the hospital, often look for free parking off-site, regardless of the current parking on the site. And this is the concern, as well as the traffic through the neighborhood, which is addressed by Councillor Leeper's motion. Thanks, Chair.
Okay, thank you. I don't have any other motions. Do we have any other motions that anyone would like to introduce at this time?
So one more by Councillor Brockington.
Well, we introduced the one at the start. So Glenn, Chair Gower had read it. Now, Councillor Brockington has joined us. Councillor Brockington, we did introduce the motion that you provided to us regarding the master plan for the experimental farm. So that has been introduced. So thank you. Okay, so we will now move to delegations. And we will start with a presentation from the applicant. Of course, the applicant will be here currently just to provide a presentation, and questions will come after we've concluded with the delegations. So who we have here with the Ottawa Hospital is President CEO Cameron Love, Chief of Staff Virginia Roth, Joanne Reed with the Ottawa Hospital, as well as Jason Emery Groen, who is the lead architect on the file. So Cameron, take it away.
Great, thank you. Can you hear me, Councilor Malton?
We can hear you well, thank you.
Perfect, well, thank you. So thank you, Mr. Chairs, and good morning all. My name is Cameron Love, and I'm President and CEO of the Ottawa Hospital. With me is Dr. Virginia Roth, the Ottawa Hospital's Chief of Staff. To start, we would like to thank the members of the city's Planning and Built Heritage Committees and all other city councilors for attending this morning. I also want to thank the city staff for whom we've been working closely with on this exercise, and we support the report that is presented today. I also want to take the opportunity to thank Councillor Keith Egley, Chair of the Ottawa Board of Health, and Dr. Vera Etches, Ottawa's Chief Medical Officer, with whom we work closely with throughout the pandemic to ensure our community has access to the very best care. As leaders of one of Canada's largest hospitals, we want to begin by recognizing and expressing our deep appreciation to the thousands of local healthcare workers for their efforts, particularly over these past 20 months of the pandemic. I know you will agree they deserve every ounce of our gratitude for their hard work and diligence in caring for our community during this most challenging time. We are, however, delighted to speak today about this exciting project. In fact, our discussion today could not be timelier, and the development of our new civic campus is absolutely necessary for two key reasons. First, the pandemic has highlighted the critical need for access to the best and most compassionate healthcare services. To be able to respond to the future challenges like a pandemic, our healthcare infrastructure, and particularly our regional trauma and referral center, has to be more accessible, has to be agile, and it definitely has to be able to accommodate today's and future standards for healthcare. Second, our healthcare system is at a critical juncture, and our growing population needs a modern world-class healthcare system. Council will soon deliberate on the region's official plan that will guide the city's growth management for the next decades. We live in one of Canada's fastest growing communities, and the significant population growth here over those next decades will increase demand for services such as education, sports and recs, arts, and most importantly, healthcare. I'll turn it over to Virginia Roth now to make a few comments.
Good morning, and I'm sorry, I'm having video difficulty. Our medical and healthcare system is evolving at a rapid pace. This new hospital site positions us extremely well to provide state-of-the-art care and access for the most acutely ill patients across Eastern Ontario, Western Quebec, and Nunavut. As the region's only trauma center, this hospital is critical to the city's growth management strategy and meeting the demands of a community that has felt firsthand the effects of a global pandemic. Every one of us wants access to world-class medicine and care. We think you will see our proposed design will ensure the Ottawa Hospital can meet our community's needs in the future. We believe it is incumbent on all of us as stewards of our community to ensure we have a hospital fitting of a G8 capital to address the needs of our community now and for the generations to come. We hope that we inspire you to imagine what the future of healthcare can be in our city, a future with 21st century technology and equipment and leading edge research, education, and innovation. With your support, we will create tomorrow. And that tomorrow is about compassionate care for more patients, leading to more discoveries and ultimately more lives saved. I would now like to introduce Joanne Reed, our Executive Vice President and Chief Planning and Development Officer, and Jason Emery Gruen, Vice President Architectural Design from HDR, who will present our vision for the future of healthcare. Joanne, over to you.
Thank you.
Oop, Joanne, I believe you're on mute.
No, you're still on mute.
Jason, I'll let you start.
Sounds good. And hopefully everyone can hear me okay. Thanks, Joanne. And I don't know if it's possible to bring the slide deck up, if that's, yes. I'll just wait for that to begin. Excellent. And I'm just going to make one adjustment on my own screen here. Bear with me for a moment. Well, there we go. All right. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for the time here this morning. As you can see, hopefully there's a blue screen here with the title of what we're going to be speaking to in a moment. If we could go to the next slide. Before we begin a brief review of the master site plan, we wanted to take a moment to speak to Heritage, as this is a joint meeting with the Built Heritage Subcommittee. Next slide. As we consider the journey of the site, we look forward to continuing on a journey to incorporate First Nations, Métis, Inuit, and urban Indigenous perspectives into our work and its relationship to the natural environment and healing. By example, in a ceremony held yesterday on the site to honor the land and thank the tapestry of nations that hold a deep connection to the land, it was so inspiring to hear the stories of hope and positivity from the stewards of the spirit of place. And in a touching moment to many of us, Marion Crow of the Indigenous Peoples Advisory Circle exclaimed, "Dream with me, if you will. Imagine a hospital where you are not afraid." This spoke to us of integration, creating something familial, inviting, profoundly equitable, something fundamentally transformational in terms of a healthcare experience. Next slide, please. The team has also spent considerable time in the review of the history of the site and changes over the last century that have seen the site occupied by various uses, from the initial damming of the Dow's swamp to the evolution of the farm and the temporary buildings on the lower portion of the site, and the moving of the Agricultural Canada headquarters to the upper portion of the site. Next slide, please. Examples such as the Sir John Carling building that held a central tower flanked by adjacent low wings, a mid-century example of architecture responding to the Griever Plan and strengthening the institutions along Carling Avenue. The team spent significant time in the National Archives reviewing how Hart Massey, the architect, developed various schemes to respond to the site, including multiple details that may well inform elements of the future design of the hospital. Next slide, please. In honoring the West Annex, for example, the last element remaining on the site, we studied the design of that wing, the structural finesse of the solution, and the experience of looking out through the mature trees of the escarpment on the site, something we see as a phenomenal opportunity to pay deference to in the public areas of the new hospital and the master site plan moving forward. Next slide, please. As Sean noted, we are here today to review the master site plan for the new civic development, and we thought we would complement some of the elements that he had noted in the earlier city presentation. Next slide, please. As we describe the master plan for the facility today, it's important to note the broad catchment this regional tertiary care trauma center serves. It will be 2.5 million square feet in phase one. It will cater to over 1 million annual visits and also include over 10,000 staff, students, and volunteers. Next slide, please. Notwithstanding the clinical needs, we believe that there is an incredible opportunity to foster transformation in terms of integrating wellness and recreation into healthcare, integrating the facility itself within the landscape, creating enhanced amenities for the community, and doing so in a sustainable manner that promotes resiliency. We believe that sustainability encompasses energy, mobility, accessibility, and equity. Next slide, please. Here is the overall master site plan with Carling along the top, Central Experimental Farm to the left, the Dominion Arboretum and Dow's Lake to the bottom and to the right. Next slide, please. And Sean described many of these elements within his earlier presentation. And one of the elements we wanted to denote here is the extension of mature trees flowing up through the escarpment from the Dominion Arboretum that form part of the central focus of this master site plan. Wayfinding for a new facility and weaving of building and nature on such a beautiful site. These trees to be preserved and maintained. Next slide. We looked at various configurations and realized that positioning the hospital on the largest portion of open land allowed for the most optimal clinical configuration with a key requirement to allow for expansion. Next slide, please. We looked at the least impact to the farm in terms of traffic and realized that positioning ambulances and emergency vehicles to the west allowed for clear segregation of flows where seconds count. The smallest quotient of traffic on the site in terms of volume is the emergency vehicles, significantly minimizing the traffic impact adjacent to the farm. The public accesses the emergency department underneath the main entrance to the east, shown here with the green dashed line from the new intersection at Champaign and Carling Avenue. More on that in a moment. We're also exploring physically dropping the central utility plant into the grade at the west of the hospital to eliminate it from view while maintaining the vital proximity and adjacency to the life-saving equipment within the hospital. The red dashed lines here on the screen represent the controlled access of what we consider professional drivers, the emergency vehicles needing to access the hospital. By bringing them swiftly onto the hospital property, we can turn off lights and sirens and really minimize impact upon arrival on the controlled driveways on the site. Next slide, please. In reviewing the urban truck routes in the city and the major flows of goods and services to the hospital, we realized we could focus the deliveries away from the central experimental farm and segregate them also away from the public access and most importantly, away from the emergency access to the site. Ultimately, locating the loading area along the south offers a discrete building services realm beyond the tree cover along Prince of Wales Drive and aligned directly with the materials management floor without the need to build long and intrusive ramps in our climate and further impacting the site. Next slide, please. As we have continued to explore ideas for the hospital, we've begun to tie this to the policy in the Preston-Carling Secondary District Plan to form an urban plaza at the bottom of the escarpment along Carling, as well as to develop a key ordering element to help the wayfinding in the hospital in the form of a main plaza at the top. I believe it might take a moment for that slide just to switch there. You might be able to see some of those graphics. Next slide, please. And beyond the plazas, the team is excited by the opportunity to link to the existing LRT station near the site and to redevelop Queen Juliana Park on the roof of the parkade. A covered, protected walkway from the LRT station through to the hospital on the roof of the parkade, offering opportunity for activation while giving this part of the site back to the city. We hope that this will not only become a hospital integrated into the natural fabric, but also a hospital stitched into the network of public transit. Next slide, please. The plazas and parkade knit through the preservation of mature trees on the escarpment and allow for the site to be porous and inviting. In fact, we hope transformational in a way we seek to integrate landscape, walking, and cycling pathways, and the natural realm as part of the first impression as one arrives to the new Civic, a rare opportunity to embed a place of healing within a natural realm in the heart of the city. Next slide. And here, provided this animation flows reasonably well here on the connection, we envision the urban plaza facing Carling as a place of activation, the first steps through the site bound by research to the right, and places to gather, maintaining and enhancing the public realm and creating the approach to the hospital. I'll just hang on a moment to see if that slide will advance. You might have seen a few views there. Next slide, please. Let's take a section through the site to have a look at key elements within the hospital. You can see the LRT tracks in the bottom right and the underground utility plant on the bottom left. Next slide, please. A few key numbers that you see here on the screen. Number one is the pedestrian pathway that comes across from the parkade into the main plaza and the main entrance of the facility. Number two is the main entrance at grade. Number three is a covered and protected emergency access through to the lower component of the hospital. Number four is a central light well that brings light within the central podium. And number five is the emergency vehicle access sunken down into grade along the west. Next slide, please. The view that you'll see in a moment is the approach of the main plaza that demonstrates how the design embraces and preserves the thickest stand of mature trees along the escarpment, creating an incredibly calming first impression as one approaches the main entrance. Covered pedestrian access through from the LRT station in Queen Juliana Park in the dash line along the left, and the outer walkways or outdoor walkways that connect a broader series of pathways on the site in the urban plaza beyond on the right. The covered emergency access up front here in red is for the public, not for the ambulances. It's the most immediately accessible entry for members of the public under duress to safely and swiftly get undercover and into the emergency department. Next slide, please. We wanted to highlight a few overall floors of the main hospital to give everyone a broader context of the vital functionality required for the hospital facility. Here is the outline of the main floor in plan. As one enters, a front concourse is designed to develop an ease of wayfinding with the main tower elevator lobbies on either end. A central light well orders the space and allows for daylight to penetrate at the center of the podium floors. Next slide, please. The second floor, is the interventional platform, where some of the most complex surgical procedures in the region will occur. The driving program element that sets the footprint for the facility to ensure for optimal efficiency in a post-pandemic reality. And here you see that in yellow, hopefully clear with some of those long arrows in either direction. Next slide, please. As we rise up into the towers, the public elevator lobbies open back to views of the main plaza and that major component of mature trees in the escarpment, continuously orienting visitors throughout their journey. Each tower floor is designed to accommodate a precise number of single patient rooms developed in pods that relate to staffing ratios and the requirement for associated services in a manner that can be fully segregated for flows during a pandemic. This also drives the footprint and the configuration of the building itself. Next slide, please. So as such, a hospital integrated into such a wonderful site like this creates an amazing opportunity to further evidence-based medicine through access to views for patients to nature, proven to reduce length of stays. Here you'll see arrows coming out of the facility itself, and the view from some of those higher levels of the patient towers, both to Dow's Lake and to the Dominion Arboretum beyond. Next slide, please. And of course, not only to the east, but to the west, to the farm, and to the south, back to the farm here as well in a moment when the slide catches up. The key for the team is very much a biophilic approach to design, one that is rooted within the natural realm and offers access and views to green space, this aspect so key to healing in the 21st century. Next slide, please. And to conclude, here you should see in a moment how early ideas for the main plaza integrate into the landscape, preserving and enveloping around the escarpment of mature trees, how the recently announced partnership with the Dara Tennis Club will form part of the Queen Juliana Commons, how the design of the parkade has continued to develop in partnership with the National Capital Commission and the City of Ottawa. The master plan also looks to the future of care with the development of an innovation center at the corner of Preston and Carling, mixed-use buildings that activate the street front along Carling, including the integration of the O train station and the development of research in this academic health sciences site. And if you could advance to the last slide, we see this as a place to heal, un lieu de découverte, a place to learn, une place pour être actif, a place to foster wellness, and the chance to weave much needed infrastructure into such a majestic site as part of the ever-evolving fabric of our nation's capital. A transformational opportunity at the intersection of city building and integration into the natural realm to foster state-of-the-art care and research. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Jason and Cameron and Virginia. I know Joanne was getting some feedback, so we didn't hear from her, but that's okay. We appreciate your presentation, and Virginia's got her camera sorted out, so we can see Virginia now. So thank you for your presentation. We will get back to you after we go through the delegations, which we will get into right now. So our first public delegation is Neil Lomer. Neil was supposed to be calling in, so just want to make sure that we have him. Yep, they're there. Oh, I said Neil, sorry. Noel.
Chair, he may need to
Hello,
press.
Chair. This is Noah Lomer. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Go ahead. You have 5 minutes.
Councillors, today you'll consider the approval of the master site plan. The lease of land from the federal government to the Ottawa Hospital was a business decision. A group of 18 politicians made a political decision and declared the Dow's Lake site to be the hospital site. However, you have never been given the opportunity to approve or disapprove of the Dow's Lake location. It's not appropriate to bypass planning committee with a decision that will affect the City of Ottawa for a century. It is not a done deal. It is your responsibility to approve or reconsider that location for the hospital. I respectfully ask you to reject the Dow's Lake location for the better, lower cost location at Tunney's Pasture. The assistant to Councillor Kitts told me that Graham Bird met with councillors at the end of August and told them that the location was a done deal. When I told her that Bird is a project manager for the Ottawa Hospital location at Dow's Lake, she replied, quote, "This is a conflict of interest," unquote. Graham Bird is both earning from his company's position for the hospital and also advising councillors they must submit to that choice of location. My contention is that the site will have much higher costs than the recommended Tunney's Pasture location. Your decision will have major cost implications for taxpayers, your constituents. I urge you to take a hard look at the costs, as well as other major problems of the Dow's Lake site. Exercise your independent judgment for the benefit of your constituents and Ottawa as the nation's capital. There's little information on the costs at Dow's Lake. I've asked for cost information from the mayor, who directed me to city planners, who directed me to Joanne Reed, Chief Planning and Development Officer of the Ottawa Hospital. She gave me no information. Councillor Luloff graciously forwarded my inquiry to Graham Bird, but he did not reply. I asked the FedCo for financial information, but was advised it is not on their agenda. Councillor Duda's staff advised, quote, just as background information, the Ottawa Hospital is responsible for fundraising the $700 million, which they have stated they plan to do through both fundraising as well as revenue such as parking, retail, and food arrangements, etc. End of quote. The 2.8 billion cost estimate has been in place and not updated for years. Oakville's new hospital of 1.6 million square feet was built 6 years ago at a cost of 2.7 billion. The new Civic is 900,000 square feet larger, but does the committee have any idea of the actual cost of this master plan? The outdated estimate of 2.8 billion does not include dealing with the slope, the earthquake fault line, the site remediation, or any of the details of the actual master plan. The cost of the garage, the cost of moving the LRT station, the cost of potentially widening roads for thousands of people working at the hospital, the cost of improving the water, sewer, and hydro lines to accommodate the hospital, the cost of potential new 417 interchange work. These costs would be lower at the Tunney's Pasture site. The hospital is expected to contribute $700,000 or 25% of the budget. It's entirely unrealistic considering the amount the hospital has raised in past years. And what is the plan to find the much needed local money when the costs inevitably escalate and when the hospital finds it cannot meet its fundraising targets? I believe the planning committee members must realize that additional costs will be repaid by the City of Ottawa taxpayers. And in conclusion, I urge planning committee to send the master site plan back to the drawing board until all costs have been reviewed and updated and compared with the NCC's recommended site at Tunney's Pasture. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you. Any questions to Mr. Lomer on the master site plan? Councillor Menard.
Thanks very much, Chair. Thanks, Mr. Lomer, for your presentation. I think you've keyed in on one of the main points, and that is the cost. I read the report fully and also met with staff, and it doesn't seem that we have a cost yet for what the city will be paying in the future of this site. I've seen different figures from media reports and how the partnership may work to try to get more costs associated with that 700 million. But I also understand the city will be on the hook for significant amount of costs here. And I'm just wondering, in your exploration for costs and how much the city might be paying in this case, what is your best estimate at this point for what you've seen or what you've heard from staff or your various discussions with councillors of how much the City of Ottawa may be paying in this regard?
I wish I had an answer for you, Councillor. No one has given me any information in response to my many questions about costs. It seems to be a question that's not even considered, but we're facing a very unusual site with a lot of unusual features and requirements. And also this figure of $2.8 billion is maybe 5 years old. No one has even considered what it is now in view of the actual plan presented as part of the master site plan. No one has ever quoted any cost to me. How many $1 billion is Ottawa going to be liable for? I would ask you, you and your fellow councillors to investigate this question, sir. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Chair.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Lomer. Our next speaker is Marcy Stevens.
Thank you. I'm done.
Yeah, no, I said thank you. You can go.
Hi, everybody.
Marcy.
Can everybody hear me?
Yes, we can. Thank you so much.
Sorry. My name is Marcel Stevens, also known as Marcy Stevens. That's okay. I'm here to speak on behalf of the Ottawa Hospital. The care that I received after my accident of January 11th with the level 1 trauma center at the Ottawa Hospital was incredible. The hospital itself, the Civic Campus, is old. I noticed that when I was in the hospital, that some of the rooms didn't accommodate wheelchair accessibility as easily as it would be in a new hospital. The accident that I was in, nobody could have prevented it. I couldn't take a pill. I couldn't go to the gym and work out to prevent it. It's something that we need. We need a hospital with state-of-the-art equipment to be able to help with future care. And I think the location and the new proposal is the best plan for us.
Thank you. I appreciate you taking the time to be here today. We have a question for you from Councillor Gower.
Not a question. I just wanted to say welcome, Marcy. It's great to see you, and thanks for joining us this morning and sharing your feedback.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. You didn't take the whole 5 minutes. Okay, we will move on to our next speaker, Neil Cruikshank. And then after Neil Cruikshank, sorry, I was supposed to do this. After Neil Cruikshank, we have Dr. Guy Hebert, Stephanie Strudwick, and Karen Wright are the 3 speakers after Neil Cruikshank. Go ahead, Neil.
I just want to make sure, can you hear me?
I can hear you, and you have 5 minutes.
Thank you very much. Good morning. So my name is Neil Cruikshank. I'm a PhD student and I also work as a consultant, and I want to thank the committee for allowing me the opportunity to speak today. So I'm happy that Ottawa is planning to get a new hospital, but I'm extremely concerned about the impact on the proposed location. I share all the concerns that you've heard, and I'm sure you will hear about selecting the experimental farm to be the site for the new Ottawa Civic Hospital, but I'd like to focus on just one aspect, which is the 50-acre campus footprint. So an important criterion for selecting the experimental farm is its size. Ottawa has few sites large enough to accommodate the proposed hospital. And what we see from the site plan is that it's intended to be a large campus, taking full advantage of the available greenfield. Now, I know that hospitals are specialized buildings with critical design constraints, but I also know that there are many examples of efficient, modern health sciences centers that occupy a much smaller footprint than what the new Ottawa Hospital claims is necessary. I can point to McGill University Health Center, the new St. Paul's Hospital in Vancouver, or New York Presbyterian. It's just some of many examples. These are hospitals that fulfill a wide range of research, education, and surgical needs, and also have capacity that meets or exceeds the proposed number of beds for the new Civic. They are examples of how a modern health sciences center can be designed and constructed without excessive land use. So my point is that the new Civic can be built on a much smaller footprint. And the more we reduce the sprawl, the less the impact on the farm. And we can avoid the inevitability of destroying Ottawa's green space. The idea of a sprawling high-tech campus is very American. It springs from the idea that land is limitless and cheap. But urban parkland is not limitless, and because of how much it contributes to the health and well-being of not just people, but all living things, it's priceless. We should recognize and value the direct and holistic benefits of our green space. I'm pretty sure we need a new hospital, but I am utterly certain that we need our urban parkland. And while there are many places we can put hospitals, particularly if we reduce the sprawl, the same is not true for urban green space. The new Civic website conveys the message that by adopting sustainability measures such as LEED, this will somehow offset the environmental loss caused by placing the hospital in the experimental farm. It's good they're going to adopt LEED, but I've worked on a major P3 project in Ottawa, and I know that while LEED measures are nice to have, they in no way compensate for the damage done by cutting, clearing, digging, and paving. And we can be sure that the environmental impacts will extend much further than the boundaries of the site as shown on the site plan. If we put a sprawling 50-acre campus in Ottawa's Central Park, the damage will be considerable and irrecoverable. I know what biophilic means. This is not that. In this day and age, with evidence of an environmental crisis all around us, it is frankly jaw-dropping to know that people would willfully decide to place the new hospital in a location and with a proposed scope guaranteed to do the greatest possible environmental damage. I'm aghast. But in my experience, destructive actions are often caused by single-mindedness and overcommitment. I've worked on a major building project, and I know it's easy to fall in love with the vision of the shiny and new. It's easy to prioritize the promise of your vision over the value of what already exists. So what I would like to do is ask those responsible, this committee, for approving this project to take an uninfatuated look at the concept.
1 minute.
And consider that we don't need something so sprawling. Instead, if we adopt a more efficient, more compact design, then we can acquire the same quality of hospital without it being accompanied by such a destructive legacy. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Cruikshank. Question for you from Councillor Menard.
Thanks very much, Chair. And I think the point, because we're sticking to the site itself today under the master site plan conditions, and I hope we do that for all delegations. We all want a modern hospital, but this is really the question. And you've raised an interesting point about how much of the space is taken up on this site. This is a huge site. I guess the question to you, I've got a couple. One would be, were you aware that other designs had been completed for this site that placed the main buildings, the main hospital buildings, closer to the LRT path? Did you know that?
No, I was not aware of that.
Okay. And were you aware previously that there was a promise made by the hospital that the parking garage would be buried?
No, I wasn't aware of that either. There's lots of technology. You've got high-speed, high-capacity elevators. You've got automated underground parking. I know that with Ottawa, with the Leda Clay underground parking can be a bit of a cost. But, you know, as a previous speaker said, they're already committing to vast sums of money, certainly out of the realistic scope for this project. So I think underground parking for sure.
Okay, and I guess my last question to you is, have you seen the diagram shows how much, because it's pretty right now, you see the green on top of the parking garage, you know, and we hope we can grow trees up there, but we're not sure because of the depth they need. Have you seen the diagram that shows how much in red is actually hardscape that will cover the site, which is about a little less than 2/3 of it for vehicles parking above ground? Have you seen that diagram where here's the remaining green space of this site and here's the hardscaping that will be coming in?
I have seen such a diagram. And again, just to say the idea of a green roof, I think that's what they're talking about. These are all very nice fripperies, but they in no way mitigate the actual impact environmentally. I mean, they cannot be compared.
Okay, I appreciate that. Appreciate your delegation, especially the point about many of the new modern hospitals being built on a fraction of the site, and what we could do here with the maintenance of precious green space in our core, while still having a very modern, multi-hundred into the thousands of beds as other hospitals have done. So thank you very much, Mr. Cruikshank. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you. I don't see any other questions. Thank you, Mr. Cruikshank. And just to Councillor Menard, I don't, as I said at the start, I'm not going to be cutting off any delegations. I'd like them to be focused on message, but I know that many of them prepared to be here today to say what they're saying, so I don't intend to cut off delegations. Our next speaker is Dr. Guy Hebert. Is Dr. Hebert here? There he is.
Good morning. I just discovered that I needed to join as a panelist.
Oh yeah, that's always helpful. We can't hear you in the other room.
I'm discovering new features of Zoom. I apologize. All right, so good morning. I want to thank the members of the committee for this opportunity to speak on behalf of my hospital, my department, and my team in support of the proposed new civic hospital development, its design, and its proposed location. I'm the head and chair of emergency medicine at the Ottawa Hospital, and I represent approximately 150 emergency physicians, trauma surgeons, resident physicians, and over 400 emergency nurses, allied health professionals who provide world-class, critical and life-saving emergency care to our community every single day on the front lines. I'm also one of the trauma leads in our region's only level 1 trauma center, serving over 1.5 million people in our region and beyond. In the emergency department of a tertiary care academic health science center and level 1 trauma center, it means that we treat the most complex and seriously ill, injured, delivering the most highly specialized care in the region. We all know that this pandemic has taken an incredible toll on our community. I would put it to you that it has affected our frontline workers to an even greater extent and served to unravel the limitations and challenges of our existing century-old hospital. Our emergency department was renovated in 2003, adjoined to the main aging building, and built to treat 60,000 patients a year. Almost 20 years later, we treat over 90,000 patients a year, and with the aging population and growth projections, it will have us treat over 100,000 patients a year by 2030. The pandemic has highlighted the challenges of delivering care to twice the volume of patients in an aging and overcrowded facility, leading to patient care lapses and limitations. You've been hearing in media about how we need to resolve the problem of hallway medicine. That is care delivered in hallways, conference rooms, garages, cafeterias and gyms, and other alternate spaces. That is our world. This issue is never more acute than in an overcrowded emergency department trying to contain a pandemic. This new 21st century hospital will solve the issues of space, an emergency department designed and built to accommodate over 135,000 visits a year. Rooms will not be separated by curtains, but separated by walls with ventilation systems that contain the spread of communicable diseases and ensure patient comfort, privacy, and safety. The equipment will be state-of-the-art. The departmental design will be planned around team efficiency and a patient journey that focuses on comfort and safety. Our world-class team of doctors and nurses will have the best designed and equipped trauma facility with radiologic, diagnostic, and interventional capabilities within the emergency department itself that again will enable the optimal efficiency and quality of care. When a Code 1 trauma is activated, meaning the signal we call when we have a badly injured patient that arrives in our department, a team of over 20 highly skilled professionals, physicians and nurses swoop down to care for the patient with expertise and precision. Yet we are relegated to doing so in a room that should have twice the space and team mobility to optimize the timeliness of care. Our new trauma bays will solve this problem. Regarding our hospital strategic location, it is never more important to be centrally located than for trauma and stroke care. With these patients, every minute and every seconds count. The most severely injured sometimes are hanging on by a thread, and we have the narrowest window of opportunity to intervene to save their life. We call this the golden hour, the narrow time window to perform life-saving interventions, after which mortality rises exponentially. With stroke patients, brain tissue is starving for oxygen and the brain is at risk. And with every second, it could mean the difference between walking out of the hospital or leaving paralyzed in a wheelchair. Swift, efficient, highly skilled interventions are critical to survival, which can only be delivered at the Civic Hospital. That is why the strategic location of central placement within our city core and rapid accessibility to the greatest number of Ottawa's citizens is crucial. The Carling location will answer that call. Finally, I want to underline that the Ottawa Hospital is home to some of the best researchers and innovators in the country. We educate, train, graduate amongst the top clinicians in the world. Indeed, our training program in emergency medicine is the most research intensive and the most highly ranked nationwide. We know it attracts the best and the brightest. In order to sustain this position, this world-class 21st century facility is needed to pave the way. A state-of-the-art facility is crucial to delivering the best care that the citizens of Ottawa deserve. The time is now. This opportunity to lay the foundations for the healthcare of the future cannot be overstated, and the need has never been so great as revealed by this pandemic. Thank you for your time.
All right, thank you. Councillor McKinney has a question for you.
Yes, thank you. And thanks so much for coming out to speak today, and obviously for everything that you do in our hospital system. I can't overstate that enough, especially over the past 18 months, but beyond that. I know we're not talking about location today, and there's not much that I don't think anything that I disagree with on what you've said here today, but just quickly, I just have one quick question. Like when you talk about the central location, everything that that you are asserting today with respect to the Carling location would have also been in place with the original site across the street from the current Ottawa Hospital. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely.
Okay. Yeah. And it's not to play devil's advocate to what you said at all. I just wanted to make that point. But thank you for coming out. And again, nothing that I disagree with.
Yeah, just simply to add that placing a site way out west or anywhere else other than the central core would be detrimental to the people who live at the opposite end of the city.
It's okay, because it's the end of today. We're not going to all of a sudden have a Ottawa Hospital in the Greenbelt, because that's not what we're doing today. So
that's correct.
No worries there. We will not all of a sudden punt this out to Navin.
Thank you, but thank you for that.
Okay.
Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor McKinney. Thank you, Dr. Hebert. So our next speaker is Stephanie Strudwick. And then from that point forward, we will go with Karen Wright, Paul Surrett, and Monica Olney. So Stephanie Strudwick.
Good morning. I'm just checking. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I'll begin. Centertown already has limited green space, and the proposed site will take away valuable green space. Today, I just want to present a win-win situation. A win-win would be Tunney's Pasture, Booth Street Complex, or LeBreton Flats for reconsideration. So I am speaking to you all in the hopes of a true win-win. A win to protect the valuable current site to be completely reconsidered from use, so this precious land can be preserved and enjoyed for many years from now. And a win, a very important win, where an alternative site can be considered for this much needed and much appreciated state-of-the-art hospital. An alternative site to be chosen which will ensure adequate space for expansion, particularly in the years to come. As the city continues to grow, there is concern that future expansion of the current site plan would be required in the coming years, and this would further compromise this precious federally owned, currently planned site. We all know that COVID has changed the demand for federally occupied office buildings, and therefore better use of these lands should be reevaluated for use at this time. Ideally, the outdated Booth Street complex should be given serious consideration at all levels. Tunney's as a site would have ample space for expansion, such as an on-site hotel that would accommodate visitors to the new campus, assuming the new campus moved there. That pretty well wraps it up for me. I would say that LeBreton Flats, Booth Street Complex, and Tunney's be reconsidered. And I just want to thank you all for the few minutes or 2 minutes that you've listened to me. Thank you for your time this morning, and that's it. Thank you.
All right, thank you. So as you know, we aren't considering location today, but I will say that Councillor Brockington did have a motion at the start of this meeting that will be considered by Planning Committee that speaks to the preservation and seeks federal legislation to protect the area surrounding the master site plan to ensure that that encroachment that you are concerned about doesn't occur in the future. So that did come up. Councillor Leeper has a question for you though.
Thank you very much, and thanks for the presentation. You started your presentation by talking about the lack of green space in Centertown. I'm guessing that you've taken a careful look at this proposal, in which there is a green roof proposed for the 4-story parking garage, which has been asserted to us to be a replacement for the public realm green space that is currently there. How do you react to that assertion? How do you feel the green roof replaces or not the current park?
Not even close. I mean, we're the capital of a country, and we all know the tour buses go through there. It's not just the West Centertown or Hintonburg or Glebe residents that enjoy that space. You look at the Tulip Festival. We have tourists from all over the world that enjoy that driveway, that enjoy that space. Putting a hospital there just eradicates that. I mean, they can put something up on top of a roof, but let's face it, we're not stupid. I mean, it's not even close to the beauty that exists there now. And my concern is, what's it going to look like in 100 years? I mean, we want to preserve that for the great-great-grandchildren that have not been born in this city yet. And we are gradually expanding every day the population of this city. So it is more urgent than ever that we reconsider an alternative location and an appropriate location that will allow a state-of-the-art hospital to expand, to serve us, to have hotels on site so that when people are flown in from other cities, they can be accommodated, and so can their family, so their families can be beside them. We need a really good space like Tunney's pasture, where we can, have on-site places for out-of-town doctors and nurses to stay, and a hotel, a good-sized hotel that will, allow visitors to get those valuable treatments they cannot get at home.
Okay, Ms. Trubik, I know we're not talking about location today, but I do appreciate the perspective on the utility of that green space. So thank you very much for that.
Thank you for asking.
Thank you, Councillor Leeper, and thank you, Ms. Strudwick.
Thank you, Stephanie, for your comments. We now move to a delegation from Karen Wright from the Civic Hospital Neighborhood Association.
Yes, hello, thank you, and good morning. Our neighborhood, the Civic Hospital neighborhood, extends from the O-Train Trillium line to Island Park Drive, from Carling Avenue to the 417. We support a well-planned and thoughtful development of a new civic campus. However, the revised traffic impact assessment and other application documents still do not address numerous specific concerns of our association. Therefore, we request the holding zone provision placed on the property not be lifted until additional conditions are applied. We request the following 8 conditions for the lifting of the provisions. Number 1, the provision of funds for the study, consultation, and implementation of local traffic mitigation. That funding should be provided by the city or the applicant for a comprehensive study and implementation of local traffic mitigation strategies. The most pressing issue is to find a way to condition or otherwise introduce funding for volume impact mitigations. Critical volume impact considerations have been omitted from the traffic impact assessment and need funding to address. We support Councillor Leeper's motion in this regard. The second related motion is to conduct a neighborhood traffic management study, and more importantly, implement strategies to mitigate infiltration of traffic. The application should include an evaluation of neighborhood traffic management needs with the intent of mitigating infiltration of traffic generated by the new campus. Those strategies should be implemented before the new campus opens to ensure foreseeable issues are prevented. This view was supported by an independent peer review conducted by the CHNA by Garrett Donaher, a professional engineer, transportation engineer at Englobe Corp. It must be emphasized that the neighborhood traffic calming studies, a tool repeatedly referred to in the TIA as a means to address traffic infiltration, is not the means to mitigate additional traffic volumes on the street. A traffic management study is the correct tool. Please note, there is no accounting in the TIA for the traffic impact due to the ongoing operations at the existing civic campus and the Heart Institute. We support Councillor Leeper's motion in this regard. Number 3, we wish to improve the auto driver share analysis to be more accurately forecasting the future auto driver share by means of a survey of the commuting modes conducted with the hospital staff at the existing campus. We're basically seeking to improve the quality of the analysis. The assumptions for the projected reduction of auto driver share from the existing 85% to 50% and later 35% appear to be optimistic and based on a flawed argument and should be restated with accurate data. The range of the auto drive share estimates ranges from 88% to 9% in the TIA. This alone speaks to the weakness of the current analysis. The provision of adequate on-site parking is therefore highly questionable and likely inaccurate. Number 4, integrated LRT. The applicant should commit to providing an LRT station connection via either below ground connection to the existing station or below ground connection to extended platforms under Carling Avenue on the south side of Carling. We do not support a pedestrian walkover over Carling. Modal share projections will not be attained without this commitment. Number 5, thank you. Number 5, a below ground parking garage. We wish the garage to be further buried to align with the initial intent in order to preserve critical active green space in the community. Number 6, Maple Drive needs to be restricted to urgent vehicular traffic. The revised TIA does not go far enough as it now describes not only the original intent of emergency vehicles, but includes other first responders, non-urgent transports, and some employee use as well. Number 7, directional signage, the H sign on the 417. We ask that the TOH commits to submitting to the province an application to move that sign. And we support Councillor Leeper's motion in this regard. And finally, number 8, a transportation monitoring oversight committee. The owner has agreed to our request to create a transportation monitoring program with terms to be determined. However, we are restating our request that the program includes representatives of local community associations. Thank you for ensuring a successful proposal.
And thank you for your deputation. We have questions from Councillor Leeper.
Thank you very much. And thank you very much for obviously a very comprehensive presentation. The key question I have for you is that, you know, a lot of the assumptions around the hospital are built around the fact that we can mitigate some of the impacts of the traffic, be it volume, be it speed, be it parking. In your experience of the city's traffic management programs, what has been your experience of the city actually implementing mitigations to existing or projected traffic problems?
I think it's been very challenging for the community and for the councillors. Everyone acknowledges that we have increased challenges as the city intensifies. However, the budgets that each councillor has for traffic mitigation are extremely limited. So in fact, critical intervention is typically not seen nor possible. That's why we're really asking for additional proactive study so that we know where the problems will be. And secondly, some funding to ensure that the mitigation actually happens.
Yeah, I think on both fronts, that's what my motion is intended to accomplish, and I'm hoping that colleagues will support me in that. Karen, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you, Councillor Leeper. Are there any more questions for Ms. Wright? Seeing none, thank you. And our next delegate is Paul Surratt of the Dow's Lakes Residents Association.
Thank you very much. Eric, could you pull up the PowerPoint that we sent you? And just for everyone on the call, we've got one PowerPoint with for 3 speakers here. Great, thanks very much. I'm starting my 5 minutes now, if that's okay. Great, my name is Paul Surratt. I'm a resident of Dow's Lake, which is a pretty beautiful 800-meter walk through Commissioners Park from the new Civic Hospital proposed site. And I'm a member of the Residents Association here on the special committee. So thank you very much for your time. Really appreciate all the work that's been done both by city staff, the hospital, and councillors. Very much appreciate the additional motions that have been brought by a number of councillors as well. So thank you to everyone for their work. Just one point right off the top. For us, this is not a question of whether one is pro or against the hospital. It's a ridiculous frame to use. I don't think there are too many people who would say, no, we wouldn't benefit from a new hospital. The question here is getting it right. And we agree with many of the concerns that have been expressed, including about site selection, but we're going to leave that to the side as per the instructions. And we're going to follow in Karen Wright's vein in terms of talking about some of the impacts on the adjacent communities and ask, in fact, I'll even use the word beg. We'll beg this committee to please hear them and to please put into action some steps that will help mitigate the worst of the possible effects. So the new Civic Hospital is going to essentially add the population of Whitehorse in the middle of a dense downtown neighborhood. And I think the impacts on adjacent neighborhoods are going to be significant. I'm going to speak primarily about the traffic or the transportation impacts. And then some of my fellow residents will speak about a number of the other issues. Essentially, what we want to say is that the city has a fiduciary and moral responsibility to ensure that the development of the hospital is done correctly and that it doesn't ask some residents to bear an unfair burden for something that will be for the good of the city overall. So we're basically asking you to ideally not lift the holding conditions until these issues have been addressed. 2, at the very least, guarantee that you will work with the neighborhood associations and support some of the motions that have been, I would say all of the motions that have been proposed. So let me just run you through a couple of our concerns about transportation. It's hard to get a real handle on some of the figures, but it seems like there's potentially 20,000 predicted daily visits to the hospital when it opens, rising to 35,000. I'm not sure if that's 100% correct in all of the documents because it's a bit of a moving target, but they're going to be very highly predictable. And sorry, if you can flip forward on the PowerPoint slide there, Eric, about 3 slides. Sorry, I'm not used to being able to do that. One more, and then one more. Thank you. The highly predictable impacts of the new hospital are going to be to create increased volume of traffic, as well as much more intensity in terms of the speeding, running red lights, et cetera, that we see on the main arteries, such as Bronson, Carling, Queen Elizabeth, number 1. Number 2, significant increase likely in volume of cut-through traffic and the increased frequency and intensity of speeding and running stop signs. And then on the residential streets, potentially becoming de facto overflow parking for the new hospital in many of the ways that I think the current Civic Hospital neighborhood have seen. Given that it's a community with a lot of seniors and a lot of children, this, we believe, will create significant dangers, both to pedestrians, cyclists, residents, visitors, and drivers who are coming in and out. We feel like the TIA and the kind of consultation so far has failed to consult us robustly and thus have largely ignored many of our, I think, very justifiable concerns. Next slide, please. So we're not just here to complain. Like Karen Wright's suggestions, we believe that there are lots of ways that if the hospital goes there, these issues can be mitigated. You can reduce the dangers due to cut-through traffic in Dow's Lake with a variety of mechanisms. You can reduce the dangers of the increased volume and speed on traffic, thank you, through a variety of mechanisms. You can use parking restrictions to make sure that we do not become a de facto overflow parking lot. And then we believe that there are a wide variety of policies that we can use, that the city can use to encourage public transportation and real-time, transparent and publicly available data so that we can identify problems when they actually happen. Last slide, please. So basically what we're saying is it's easy to dismiss these kind of concerns as NIMBYism. We don't believe they are. We believe any resident in the city who was faced with significant impacts like this would ask City Council to live up to their responsibility and make sure all of these issues are addressed before construction begins and not after the fact. Last 2 seconds. So we're asking you to, number one, not raise the or not lift the holding conditions, and number two, if you do, that you absolutely guarantee that you work with neighborhood associations and concerned residents to address these issues. And many of the motions that I heard for the first time this morning, we support strongly, and we would love to have them passed, and a statement of commitment and principle that you will work to address these issues. Thank you very much. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Paul, for your comments. And we do have questions for you from Councillor Menard.
Thanks very much, Chair. And sorry, I got kicked out of the meeting there just the very last second and then just came back in. So I missed the last minute, but I just wanted to thank you for being here and ask you to get a little bit more specific, if you could, Paul. And I'm not seeing your picture anymore. Hopefully you can still, oh, there we go. Again, my computer may be lagging a bit here, but I'm wondering if you can get a bit more specific about some of the concerns in the neighborhood. So I imagine overflow parking is a concern where there's cheap, free parking essentially, or no charge parking on those streets in this area. Parking hours, the cut through potential in this area. I just want to get into some more details, if you can, of what specifically those concerns are. I imagine from seeing the documents that you had sent me previously as well, that some of the modal share that the city is saying can take place is a concern given where some of those transit facilities are located and the lack of access for some of the other facilities like cycling and transit into the site, which of course we have motions on. So if you could just get a bit more specific, that would be helpful.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. I'd bucket our concerns into kind of two main buckets. One is about safety and real danger, and the other one is about significant inconveniences. On the danger front, it's certainly the volume, the intensity of traffic on both the arterial streets and the residential streets. And there, I think we just have lots of evidence from previous changes in traffic dynamics in terms of the impact on this and other neighborhoods, where we're just going to see a lot more traffic, but we're going to see a lot more speeding, and we're going to see a lot more running of the red lights. I think it's totally plausible to imagine that a lot of people who want to get to the hospital are going to be feeling a lot of urgency, and therefore they will look for ways around the kind of speeding limits, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a series. So we have concerns that, both on Bronson, which is already dangerous for cyclists, pedestrians, especially for seniors and kids. Kids have to cross that every day, several times to get to school. Many Glebe residents and City of Ottawa residents crossed on the other way to get into the park. but also cut through traffic, which already exists, and it happens at a fairly high speed. So we're worried that this is going to be exacerbated significantly, and therefore we would want to work with the city to create a variety of strong incentives to make sure that that doesn't happen. That's number one. Number two, obviously, the inconvenience is more on the parking. I mean, and there it's quite linked, as you said, to we have significant questions, as Karen Wright raised, about the modal assumptions. I mean, the TIA itself clearly says that the modal assumptions are optimistic. I believe they use the word may not be desirable, given that they don't even remotely come close to what the existing civic hospital is experiencing. And therefore, our concerns on that would be, we would want to see a lot more thinking about how to manage the parking, how to highlight and really push public transportation, make it accessible, make it something, make it easy to get there without using a car. And so some of it is saying, well, we don't want to be an overflow parking lot for the hospital. You guys are, the hospital is designing this from scratch. It's entirely predictable. You have the experience of the old civic hospital to guide us. It's not going to be any surprise that this happens. It's just straightforward incentives. What is very surprising is that we wouldn't plan for this and address it better at this point. And so that's why it's not a pro-hospital versus anti-hospital. I'm not going to get into the site discussion. It is a question of, let's do it smart. And surely we can do a little bit better than this instead of, and just our experience has been, we've been told, well, there's other opportunities. I understand there are other opportunities to get into this, but why wouldn't you come up with a better kind of approach, even at a high level, and a strong set of commitments right now? At the very minimum, the motions that have been described, that have been introduced, seem like very strong and reasonable ways to address some of these things. I would really appreciate that and a principled statement of support for adjacent neighborhoods so that it can be done fairly and justly, right? So that we're not being asked and others aren't being asked to really pay a high cost when it can be avoided. I'm not sure if that answered your question fully.
It does. That's very specific. You're very clear. Thank you for that. I hope that you might consider, being part of that group. I mean, I personally think we need to demand better here and hold this until we get better on the site specifics. There's a lot of things here that should be changing. But on the transportation side, I hope that you'll consider as an individual and as a representative of that community, taking part in what should be the hospital engaging in a transportation impact assessment within the neighborhoods. They say they're going to be doing that. The city is giving that responsibility to them. The hospital will have to decide, which is why we've phrased the motions we have the way we have today. So they need to be open to that. And I guess we'll have to ask that question of them later on today. Thanks, Paul, for your delegation. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks. I would love to participate and bring a constructive problem-solving mindset from our point of view.
And thank you, Councillor Menard. We also have questions from Councillor Dudas.
Hello, Paul. Actually, not even so much as a question, but just more of a mention of appreciation. The circumstances as they are will be impactful on the surrounding community. And I very much appreciate you coming to committee and taking the time to not only share them, but in a very, as you even use the word, constructive manner, speak to the need for a proactive approach to this. So I wanted to thank you for that, because I think that regardless of what the end result is, whether the hold stays on or off, to have a proactive approach and to make sure that parking is addressed and traffic is addressed and any of the implications of the increased use of that site on the community and the surrounding community is completely valuable and, as you said, predictable. So to get out in front of it is appreciated. So I just wanted to thank you for that. I think it was very beneficial to hear from that perspective.
Well, thank you very much. And I believe a number of my colleagues are going to speak to related issues. So thank you very much to everyone and for all of the effort that I know it's a huge, huge project. So we very much appreciate the effort and we're trying to engage constructively. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor, and thank you, Paul, for your statements today. The next delegation is Monica Only from also Dow's Lake Residents Association. And
can't hear you.
Monica, you can go ahead.
Still no sound, Ms. Olney.
And maybe staff can assist Monica with fixing her sound. I think I see Joseph Frederico from the Residents Association also online. So maybe we go to Joseph first and then we can return to Monica.
Absolutely, thank you. Can you hear me? Yeah, okay. My slide is the last one, the colorful one. Erica, if you can move ahead to that, please. Thank you very much. Perfect, thank you so much. Thank you for the opportunity to present today. The Dow's Lake Residents Association is fully supportive of a new civic campus and a center of excellence in care. But we have serious concerns about the environmental impacts, and we believe this project will put our values to the test. The official plan clearly states that what residents value most are distinctly livable communities, green and open spaces, and the unique characteristics that distinguish Ottawa from all other places. Ottawa is Canada's symbolic focal point. What we say and do in Ottawa matters. Climate change, floods in Cumberland, hurricanes in Dunrobin, heat waves felt by the most vulnerable in our community, such as those in Haringate and Overbrook. Events that were once generational have become perennial. We have declared a climate emergency, and in so doing, a commitment to climate action. The hospital's environmental impact statement clearly states that the new civic campus at Dow's Lake will impact on wildlife, birds, vegetation, and mature trees. The master servicing plan clearly states that stormwaters from the site will continue to flow into Dow's Lake, affecting fish habitats and waterways. Through the Rideau Canal, waters from Dow's Lake flow into the Ottawa River, our main source of drinking water. What does the evidence tell us? In 2019, researchers from Carleton University found that the experimental farm helped reduce the city's temperature and air pollution. Is it reasonable to pursue a policy of intensification while at the same time reducing urban green space by more than 50 acres? In 2015, the David Suzuki Foundation reported that green spaces help keep cities cool and clean. The elderly and those living in poor, high-density areas are the most affected by air pollution and heat-related illness. Does using more than 50 acres of urban green space help build a more just and inclusive city? In 2017, The Lancet reported that a modern anesthetic machine running for 1 hour was the same as 230 cars running for the same period. In 2019, the Journal of the American Medical Association reported that the healthcare sector was a significant source of greenhouse gases. Green cities are healthy cities. If we are going to use over 50 acres of urban green space in the heart of Ottawa, we must do it in the very best way possible. Environmental impact assessments maximize positive impacts and minimize negative ones on the environment and nearby communities. Environmental impact assessments by the Impact Agency of Canada are guided by principles including reconciliation and partnership with Indigenous peoples, basing decisions on scientific evidence and Indigenous knowledge, providing predictability, transparency, and timeliness, and meaningfully engaging with the public. A new civic campus at Dow's Lake, a major development on federal lands, beside the Dominion Arboretum, on a national historic site, and next to Ontario's only UNESCO World Heritage Site. We need to be sure that we measure twice and cut once. The environment, air quality, rising temperatures, the impact of climate change on people, the elderly, those living in high density areas, the vulnerable, the disadvantaged, the sincerity of land acknowledgements, reconciling with our past, building a future, healthier cities, happier people. Dow's Lake, environmentally sensitive, ecologically rich, and urban green space in the middle of our city. This hospital will be a major development on federal lands. What is required is an independent environmental impact assessment. Without one, you should not lift the holding provisions. I would like now to pass the camera to Carmen Sanchez, President of the Dallas Lake Residents Association.
Thank you for giving us the opportunity to present today. You have heard some compelling arguments from members of our community. The new Civic Hospital is a legacy project that will reach beyond our time. You have a fiduciary duty to do what is right and what is necessary. It is imperative that we take the time we need now to make the right decisions and achieve the best outcomes for the future. Again, thank you for your time and consideration.
Thank you. We appreciate your comments, and I see that Councillor Menard has questions.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair. And sorry about my screen. I keep lagging here, but thank you so much, Ms. Sanchez, Mr. Federico. Nice to see you, and good presentation. I wanted to go further into the environmental impact assessment portion that you had talked about. Obviously, there is concern with how much green space will be lost to paving over in this area. And this is considered a major project, $2.8 billion, major development on federal lands. So I understand the hospital has put forward reports on the environmental impact statement, not the same as an environmental impact assessment. And I just wanted to get further into that. What details are you aware of when an environmental impact assessment must be done, and your background knowledge on an environmental impact assessment for this site in particular?
Well, my understanding is that the environmental impact assessment through the Impact Agency of Canada is something that is commonly done and often even required for a major development on federal lands. And I think that much of what I'm hearing throughout many of the presentations today, many of those issues would be captured by the environmental impact assessment. Again, it would be done independently through the Impact Agency of Canada. It would look at many impacts that would affect the site itself, of course, the green spaces and the environment. It would look at the economic and environmental impacts beyond the site, and certainly looking at other elements in terms of transparency, predictability, accountability, and obviously with a project of such magnitude, I think that all residents, are looking for those kinds of elements in the expenditure of public funds. Especially in the magnitude of billions, rather, I should say.
Thank you for that, Chair. I don't know if staff have information about this that we don't on the environmental impact assessment. It may be worthwhile going to them just to hear about that. It's obviously a pretty major piece. I'm wondering if that is possible.
At this time, I'll entertain hearing from staff briefly.
Mr. Chairs, I can get back to you in a moment. I have preliminary, there's information that sorry, getting feedback. I apologize, I had some feedback there. The federal government does have to do an environmental assessment impact, so that's being held at the federal level through Public Works and Government Services Canada, and I can I'll provide some notes in a moment if I just go through and see exactly the details of that impact assessment, but that's not a study that is part of kind of council approved studies that the applicant had to submit to staff. It's more of a federal level.
And in the interest of time, would it just make sense for when we hear from staff and ask staff questions to get more of some more detail around the federal EA process? I think it would. So it's just good that you'll be able to address that. So I do appreciate staff's intervention here on that, and that we'll be able to hear more on that later.
Thank you, Chair. I appreciate that and appreciate the preliminary information. Obviously, that's going to be extremely important. This area is sensitive. There have been a lot of studies done here about the sensitivity of this site next to, again, a UNESCO World Heritage Site. So I guess, Mr. Federico, thank you again for your presentation. I do think it makes sense to get this right. And there's still a lot of outstanding issues, and I'm really hoping our folks make sure that we're pushing for better on this, in particular on the site itself. And really appreciate your intervention here. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Menard, and thank you, Planning Committee.
Thank you. And are there any other questions for this joint delegation from Dow's Lakes Residents Association? Seeing none, just wanted to see if Monica can interact with us and provide her delegation.
I believe she's called in, Chair, and she should be enabled to speak over the phone at a minimum if her system audio is not working.
Excellent.
Yes, can you hear me now?
We can hear you, so please go ahead.
You can hear me? Oh,
We
great. I
can.
wonder if you could back up the slides a little bit to the one that says Finance 1, please. Okay, I'll start. Good morning to the members of the Planning Committee. My name is Monica Only, and I'm making this presentation on behalf of the Dow's Lake Residents Association. I'm going to speak about the costs associated with this mega project. But let me start by saying that the city must not lift the holding conditions until there is more clarity around the costs and how they are to be apportioned. There is significant lack of clarity regarding the realistic cost of the Civic and who is to pay for what. Accordingly, the city is potentially assuming a high level of financial risk. So given this lack of information, lack of transparency, and given the potential high financial risk to the city, let me reiterate that the city should not lift the holding provision at this time. Next slide, please. This slide will give you an idea of why we believe the costs for the hospital are either outdated or highly optimistic. Here we compare the Oakville Hospital, which opened in December 2015, to the numbers we have for the new Civic, scheduled to open 13 years after Oakville in 2028. As you'll see from the slide, Oakville opened with 340 beds. We're expecting 640 beds on opening of the new Civic, almost double. Oakville has 1.6 million square feet. Ottawa is expected to have 2 million square feet at opening, 25% more than Oakville. The cost for the hospital at Oakville was $2.7 billion versus the estimate that we have for the new Civic at $2.8 billion, a mere 3.7% higher than Oakville at a difference of 13 years. So different metrics. We can look at the Oakville Hospital having paid $8 million a bed. Yes, that's $8 million a bed, or roughly 1,700 a square foot. Whereas the new Civic comes in at 4.4 million per bed, or 1,400 a square foot. Other numbers that are interesting, the contribution from the city of Oakville for their new hospital was $130 million. We do not know what the city of Ottawa will contribute, if anything. In Oakville, there were no increased city taxes. We do not know if there will be an increase in city taxes here in Ottawa. And in Oakville, the community contribution was $60 million. In Ottawa, the community is expected to contribute $700 million. Next slide, please. Let me say a few words about the expected $700 million to be raised from the community. We have no reply from the Ottawa Hospital as to their plans as how to raise that princely sum of 700 million from the community. City staff have suggested that the 700 million will be raised by the hospital through fundraising, parking fees, retail and restaurant operations. And of note, for the fiscal year ending 2021, net parking revenues from the 3 campuses of the Ottawa Hospital totaled $11 million. And parking revenue usually goes to the purchase of new equipment. On the right side of this slide, it details additional potential costs to the city. So the master servicing report by Parsons identified challenges with respect to water surfacing because of topography. It identified the need to relocate private sanitary infrastructure and stormwater sewers on the farm. It identified significant flooding risks in a lower Mooney's Bay collector and the Nepean Bay trunk. And in addition, we know that there will be traffic gridlock and congestion at key intersections, which will demand road modifications, signaling, signage, and there will be a need to rebuild bike paths. Next slide, please. In conclusion, there is far too much financial uncertainty and vulnerability for the city to lift the holding conditions at this time. With such incomplete information, the fiscally responsible course of action is to keep the holding provision in place until further information is available. And both the city and the hospital would be in breach of their fiduciary duties if the holding provisions are lifted at this time. Thank you.
Thank you, Monica, for your delegation. Are there any questions? And I see that Councillor Menard has raised his hand to ask questions.
Thanks very much, Chair. Just very quickly, thanks, Monica, for that presentation. I'm wondering, do you know if Oakville, when they were deciding on their site plan and their hospital, if those costs were known in advance of that decision?
No, I don't know the answer to that.
Okay, be useful to know from staff if that was the case. Not that that factors in too much. We have our own decision to make here, and obviously knowing costs for the city before making a decision is important. So thank you.
And I see that Chair Moffat has also raised his hand. And we can't hear you, Chair.
I forgot to unmute my other mic. Sorry, in the presentation, you mentioned about Oakville and the cost to taxpayers. You said that the $130 million was no impact on taxpayers. Can you elaborate on that, please?
Yes, my understanding is that the city of Oakville actually sold some business that they were involved in. And so the proceeds from that business were their contribution to the hospital. It resulted in not having to raise taxes. And just as a comparison, another number here, the city of Windsor, which is also looking to build a new hospital and just slightly ahead of Ottawa, about 5 years ago, they brought in a tax levy for all the residential tax bills there. And so everybody has a levy that they will be paying annually for a total of 14 years. So in the case of Oakville, no, there was no increase in taxes. In the case of Windsor, for 14 years, the residents will be paying increased taxes.
Yeah, in Oakville, they did use $40 million from a previous sale. It wasn't something that was sold in order for them to fund the hospital, but it was a previous sale. So they took $40 million in money that they had accrued from that. They also took out a debenture of $90 million to fund the rest of their $130 million. So in reality, those two numbers would have an impact on taxpayers at some point because someone has to pay.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Monica. I don't see any other questions from the joint committee. So the next registered speaker is Christina Robbins from Botanica Residents Committee.
Good morning. My name is Christina McKenney, and I am a concerned citizen of Ottawa and the chair of the Botanica Residence Committee on the new civic development. We are directly across from the observatory on Maple Drive. I guess I would begin by saying that a lot of the concerns that I had in my address mirror much of what has been said by the Civic Hospital Neighborhood Association, the Dow's Lake Association, and certainly Joseph Frederico's presentation on the need for an independent environmental assessment. Let me begin by saying that we, like all of you, obviously strongly support a new hospital in Ottawa. It needs a replacement. It is an aging campus. We don't disagree with the central core requirement, although there are people who live east, west, south, north, in all of the suburbs who share equal needs in terms of being able to access the Civic Hospital very quickly. We've been fortunate neighbors of both the Civic and the Central Experimental Farm for many years, and that's why we are acutely aware of the need for both. One providing essential health care when we need it, and the other protecting our well-being and shielding us from pollutants and the climate crisis that we're all facing. From a health perspective, the trees and green space of the Central Farm are equally important to the very significant historic aspects of the farm, which we stand to lose. We've been told repeatedly that it was the hospital who rejected the NCC's recommendation in 2016 to build at Tunney's Pasture, and who chose the current site. While they may have pressed for this site, they aren't the authority to choose or decide the use of this public land. That decision could only be made by the NCC and the federal government as the guardians of that land. But they are supported by provincial and municipal officials, each with your associated responsibilities. The province for hospital funding and the municipality for infrastructure and planning support. So we didn't expect this from a hospital board, as they should be equally concerned with our livability and the well-being of our community. Did anybody point out the potential difficulties with this particular choice of land and argue that the NCC's original decision was the right one? We're still asking that. We should at least have an understanding as to how and why the decision was made. No one has ever answered that. The city's own study of the dangerous effects of heat islands and the Carleton University study of the benefits of the green space at the farm should be enough to persuade anyone that we need both the hospital and the farm left intact if we're to thrive as a healthy community. We have watched in horror the ravages of forest fires throughout Canada this year, and we know with certainty that we need more, not less, environmental protections. Some of the issues specific to the site, which others have mentioned, it has the largest footprint of any recent modern hospital, and we question the 3 large towers. They seem unnecessarily included and expanding the footprint. The farm is not protected, contrary to agriculture's contention that it continues intact since 1886, and this should be of concern to all Heritage Committee members. The removal of mature trees and wildlife in 50 acres will have negative impacts, and the 2 green spaces mentioned will not come close to compensating as replacements. There will be no underground parking, although the design now seems to speak to some partial planning to have some of it underground. Parking is underestimated. Traffic remains largely, the traffic projections remain largely unchanged and need to be studied closely. The fact that the LRT doesn't bring individuals to the entrance of the hospital, again, has been addressed numerous times. A final comment on the traffic: combining a hospital of that magnitude with the development of at least 12 new high-density towers on the north side of Carling is going to create gridlock at numerous intersections in the city. It's not the optimal location. It's too close to Dow's Lake. So we have a number of other remediation issues that we raised in our submission, but I won't go through those. We would agree with the other associations that the holding provision shouldn't be lifted until the concerns on costs and on the environmental assessment, where there should be an independent assessment, and until the traffic studies have been redone with more accurate projections. I thank you for the time to address the committee. We just think that before we proceed with a project with well over 2.8 billion, we should be able to answer one question. Why is this site superior to the original NCC recommendation? Thank you for your time and for your work.
Thank you for your statement. Are there any questions for Ms. Robbins? Seeing none, thank you for your delegation. The next delegation is Nico Fleming. Oh, sorry, the next delegation actually is Eric Schiller of the Ottawa Water Study Action Group.
Hello, everybody. Can you hear me?
We can't hear you.
Okay. My name is Eric Schiller. I'm a retired.
Well, I cut it short because he said like 1 minute.
In the Civil Engineering Department of the University of Ottawa. And while I was there, I taught environmental engineering and water resources. And listening to all you people here, it's obvious that the planning for this hospital site and its construction has gone through a turbulent time. And I suppose many of you are glad you're finally getting to the end of this. You can make a final confirmation and get on with the work. I would like, along with others, just to say there's one more thing in my mind needs to be done before this goes forward. And that is a thorough and adequate environmental impact assessment must be made. There has been some kind of an environmental assessment, but it's not, in my mind, been thorough or adequate. And there is a federal procedure for doing such an environmental assessment. You might say, well, what's this? Why the environment? We are living in the edge of an environmental crisis. The west of Canada is suffering a severe drought. We have wildfires like we've never seen before. The ocean is heating up, and so we have hurricanes of unusual force and intensity causing flooding and climate disturbances all around the world. The glaciers of the world are disappearing. And if we look north from Canada, our polar ice cap, from the time we started to measure this in 1975, the area of the polar ice cap has gone to half. Half of it is left, and the ocean is slowly rising. Well, you might say, well, wait a minute. What's all that's got to do with planning a hospital in the center of Ottawa? Well, whatever we're doing now, we're not doing it right. The world scientists in the climate tell us that this is the decade that counts, 2020 to 2030. Now we've got to change course. And we're supposed to be reducing climate carbon emissions by 1/2. We haven't even begun to go down yet. We're going up. There's something wrong here. We've got to change our paradigm. We've got to change our way of thinking. I'm very glad to hear that the restraining conditions are going to be kept. I would highly recommend we put a pause on this whole thing until we do an adequate environmental assessment. Now, let's go back to the sites. It's planned to put this hospital on the experimental farm. This is a treed lot. I'm glad to hear there is some concern to try and keep as many of those mature trees as possible, but many of them will go, perhaps hundreds of them. Trees are important. They consume 30% of all the carbon dioxide produced by humans. And the idea that we will now plant some new trees is ridiculous because it takes decades to grow a full growth tree, and so it can do its work of absorbing carbon dioxide. The new little trees we don't have enough time for them to reach their mature growth. The other thing, as I look at the hospital at the experimental farm, there's a massive amount of space put into parking, a flat level parking, a parking garage. It all assumes a car-centric culture. That cars and trucks are part of the problem. They are producing 20 to 25% of all the carbon dioxide, which is creating the problem. Or you might say, well, we're going to go to electric. That is a partial transition, but eventually we have to think more of public transportation. And this site at the experimental farm will require massive environmental damaging structures to cause this parking that is planned. There's
1 minute.
Half of it isn't no. Well, by contrast, let's look at the other sites. We can't help but look at Tunney's pasture when we're thinking of the environment. It's flat. There's no trees. There is an LRT station. It's built for the future. It's cheaper and it's better. So I ask you, this is the decade that counts. What we do now will determine our future. And this hospital will be built right smack in the middle of this decade. Look at it through environmental lenses. Put a pause on it. Do not lift the constraining conditions. Your children will thank you for it. We're talking about their future. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Schiller, for your comments. Are there any questions for this delegate? Seeing none, thank you for your delegation. The next delegation is Nico Fleming. And I don't know if Nico has joined us.
He's just coming online now, Chair.
And Nico, you can go ahead.
Hi there, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Great, thanks very much. And sorry, I'm actually doing this call from the Ottawa Hospital, the General, where I had a procedure this morning, so it's not ideal audiovisual. So my name's Nico Fleming. I live in the Dow's Lake neighborhood. You can see the proposed new campus site from the end of my block. I'm also a frequent hospital user. I have a rare and likely fatal form of cancer. And I'm only here today to be able to speak to this because of the incredible work by healthcare professionals over 3 years at the General Campus, at the Civic Campus, and at Princess Margaret in Toronto. So I think any of the 3 main proposed sites for the hospital would be reasonable, including the Dow's Lake one. I certainly know from my experience working on large government projects that the surest way to significantly delay and possibly kill a major project is to constantly change major design aspects, change location decisions, things like that. And I think hospitals are too important for that. You know, Ottawa has a growing population. We need an expanded hospital that's state of the art that can support that population. I'll also maybe talk for a little bit about my neighborhood right at Dow's Lake. It's a lovely neighborhood. It has the lake, it has fabulous parks. It's also, on average, not everybody, but on average, a quite wealthy and privileged neighborhood. And I kind of fear that there's a view among some people that, you know, a new hospital is great in theory, as long as it doesn't go in my neighborhood. And hospitals are there to support everybody in the city at their times of most need. And I think particularly, they're there for lower income people and people with other disadvantages because they tend to have worse health outcomes overall. So I really hope that proposals for improving specifics to the proposal at the Dow's Lake site are made and taken in a spirit of, you know, making feasible improvements, because that's always a good thing to do the due diligence on a project. But we can't allow that to happen in a way that will subject a project that's this important to endless delays or to sort of the death of 1,000 cuts. That was really all I had to say. Hospitals are very important. They're there for all of us. And I would ask everybody on council to please help this get built at the site where the land has been provided in a reasonable amount of time. Thank you for listening.
And thank you, Nico, for coming out and providing us input on this file that's before us today. I see that Councillor Menard has his hand raised to ask you some questions.
Thanks very much, Chair, and thanks very much, Mr. Fleming. And I appreciated your email on the subject as well. I just got back to you not too long ago, and very much understand the sentiment in there. And I think, that is what we've been trying to do through this process, is to improve what's on that site and how it works, how it functions with traffic in your neighborhood, how it works with modal share, which we say we really want to improve going to that site, or else we will see that congestion. How to make sure that there's green space to be enjoyed by folks in that neighborhood still. And I think you also nail it, that we want a new modern hospital. And I guess the key to that is, how do we get there? What do we do to make sure that it's as best designed as possible? That's the only question in front of us. And so in terms of any delay from getting it right, I think it's important that, and I'm sure, and this is the question to you, is I assume you also recognize that some of the cynicism people may be feeling about the site selection goes back to the 2016 decision. And that without that, we may not have had so much cynicism around the site and the way it's designed in terms of a delay. And I expect you also recognize that. And that's really my only question to you, and just wanted to wish you well and thank you for being here.
Hi, yeah, could I answer that just for a second?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, so I mean, I do understand the concerns that I've certainly heard from people about the decision being made. I guess my perspective on that as a longtime federal bureaucrat is that, advice provided by, bureaucrats at an organization like the National Capital Commission is sort of based on their own expert assessment of the decision factors facing them. But it's the elected officials like you and like provincial MLAs and like federal MPs who we, the public, elect to actually take those decisions. So the fact that elected officials chose a site that was different from the site that the bureaucrats recommended, I don't see that as in any way illegitimate. I see that as the system working actually the way it's supposed to work.
Okay, it's important to have consultation with folks as well when those things are done. So I appreciate that. Thank you for being here once again, and wishing you all the best, and look forward to our continuing discussions on a whole variety of topics. Thank you.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Menard. Are there any other questions for Nico? Seeing none, we just want to provide our heartfelt thanks, really, for taking the time to be with us this morning. And our next delegate is Debbie Grinsdale.
Good morning, and thank you for this opportunity. My name is Debbie Grinsdale. I'm speaking from the unceded territory of the Algonquin Nation. I worked and lived in Ottawa for the last 30 years. Understand, has been pointed out by many, the need for a new civic hospital. However, I am opposed to the significant loss of trees and green canopy at the farm site. Today, I speak to you from my roots and about my concerns. The farm kids were a group of children who lived at the Central Experimental Farm in the early 1900s because their fathers held positions there. My father, Simpson Grinsdale, known as Sam, and his 5 siblings were farm kids because my grandfather, Joseph Hiram Grinsdale, joined the staff of the farm in 1899 as an agriculturalist. 12 years later, he succeeded William Saunders to become the second director of the experimental farm from 1911 to 1919, at which time he went on to become the deputy Minister of Agriculture until his retirement in 1932. My father and his siblings, all born on the farm, grew up in what was called the superintendent's house, beautiful house of turrets, chimneys, and porches that was torn down in the 1930s to build the William Saunders building. I grew up hearing endless stories, particularly from my dad and my aunt, who were the youngest in the family. For me as a child, the farm was a place we visited regularly. In more recent times, my own family has planted 4 trees in honor of my parents and other family members in various areas of the farm. One of those trees is at the Dow's End Lake of Prince of Wales, across from the site that we're discussing, and is likely to be sacrificed when the Prince of Wales is surely to be widened because of heavy traffic flow and congestion, as was indicated by the plans shown by earlier speakers. For me, the farm is a sacred place. My personal story is rooted in its history and in my own connection to this beautiful oasis of greenery, trees, and peace in the center of our city. In 1997, the entire Central Experimental Farm was declared a National Historic Site, recognizing it as a place of profound importance to Canada. The plans for the Dow's Lake Experimental Farm site have major consequences for green space, loss of parkland, defacement of National Historic and UNESCO heritage sites, and overwhelming traffic issues that will impede access to the hospital. And those have been discussed at length earlier. In 2021, in the midst of a full-blown climate crisis, it seems unconscionable to me that the felling of nearly 500 or more mature trees is being considered. I acknowledge the motion that was laid out earlier about tree conservation and planting, but newly planted saplings cannot replace what mature trees do for the environment. Ottawa's climate change master plan identifies as priority actions the development of a climate resiliency strategy and the application of a climate lens to planning. The new official plan cites the need to protect, enhance, and manage trees to build resilience to climate change. Higher temperatures and extreme heat will increase the need for passive recreational areas to protect at-risk populations. This includes access to green spaces that have tree canopy and shaded structures. This is what the site at the farm represents. We are in the midst of a climate emergency, and during the above average temperatures that we saw in Ottawa this past summer, one only had to visit the farm, as I often did, to see many people picnicking, walking, bringing their kids to play under the shade of the
1 minute
welcoming canopy. If this section of the farm is sacrificed, a precedent will be established that would make further incursions into the farm easier, and more green space will be lost. The farm faced a somewhat similar crisis in the 1950s when the Civil Service Recreational Association was looking for a new home for the RA Center. The board of the association concluded that the Arboretum would be the perfect spot. Wiser heads prevailed and the plan was dropped thanks to the interventions of several high-level officials and scientists. It took conviction and vision to save the Arboretum. In the midst of a climate emergency in 2021, your vision and conviction are needed to save green space, this historic site, and serenity for present and for future generations. Thank you.
And thank you for your comments. And we have questions from Councillor Menard.
Thanks very much, Chair. Thank you, Ms. Grisdale, and for all your advocacy on a variety of topics in the community. Thank you for being here today. And I'm glad you touched on heritage. It is something that we heard a presentation early on. And of course, we have members of Built Heritage Subcommittee with us. And you did speak to that. So I guess the question for you is I'm not sure if you've had a chance to look at the cultural impact heritage statement and what it says. But one of the things it says is that the east of Maple Drive, occupied by Sir John Carling building from 1914 to 1969, the historical value of the entire property has been devalued, and the cultural impact of the new development will be minor or negligible. And I'm wondering how you square that with the fact that the Central Experimental Farm in its totality was declared a National Historic Site in just 1998. And what do you think about those statements?
Well, I think the timing is significant. The impact the new hospital site, I would say, and the shadow, the virtual shadow that it would cast over the whole farm area would be significant, and that can only speculate underestimating what have been, excuse me, any references to traffic flow and difficulties that that raise. So I think the site there would have an impact on the entire farm and also on its historic status.
Thank you for that. And I guess my last question is really about the designs. There was an original design put forward by the hospital that had much of the landscape preserved closest to those remaining heritage buildings, Dominion Observatory and others. And it was to the northeast of the site, much closer there, where the main buildings were there, with preserving much of the rest of that landscape. In your mind, would that be better than what we currently see in front of us today?
Well, that's perhaps a more specific question that I'm prepared to answer. I think my biggest concern is the loss of the green space and the and trees and canopy. And so I recognize what you're asking, but I'm not in a position to give an answer that I'd feel comfortable with.
Fair enough. And that design, that initial design, without having seen it, of course, did preserve much more of that space. So I appreciate you being here. Thank you for your delegation.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Are there any other questions for Debbie? Seeing none, thank you for your statement today. The next registered speaker is Diane McIntyre.
Good morning. Before you start my time, Mr. Chair, would you please ensure that all the members of the committee are actually there? Because I'm just seeing blank names, and I have a right as a citizen to know who's listening to me. So please don't start my time until we at least have all three chairs and the members of the committee. Thank you. I'll wait until you give me the start, and I'll press my timer as well.
Well, the platform does allow people to turn off their cameras. But we do have city staff that ensures that we have quorum at all times. We can't continue the meeting without quorum. So we will obviously, we're all here to listen to you and the public, and we're doing so, I believe, diligently this morning. So please begin your delegation.
Thank you.